Welcome to Potter Read. Today's adventure. Harry translated the Goblins' lost war songs at age 7 and they named him Battle Friend. If you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Now let's begin. Chapter 1, The Gift for the Tongue. The cupboard under the stairs had a sound to it. Harry had learned this the way he learned most things, which was alone and without anyone meaning to teach him. When Uncle Vernon came down the stairs in the morning, the boards above the cupboard sang a low complaint, each tread a different note, the third from the bottom flat and cracked where the wood had split years ago. Aunt Petunia's steps were quicker and higher. Dudley's came in a thunder that had no notes in it at all, only weight. Harry could lie in the dark with his eyes shut and know exactly who was awake and where they stood in the house, and how angry they were, all of it written in the timber over his head like marks on a page only he could read. He was 7 years old, and he had never once thought this was strange, because no one had ever told him it was. The house on Privet Drive was quiet that morning in the particular way it went quiet before the Dursleys remembered he existed. Harry lay still and listened to the pipes tick as the hot water moved through them, 3 rooms away, and hummed the tick back under his breath until it matched. It always settled something in him to do that, to find the pitch of a thing and hold it. The kettle had a pitch. The car in the drive had a pitch when it idled, and a different one when Uncle Vernon was cross and pressed the pedal too hard in reverse. The world was full of sounds that wanted to be answered, and Harry answered them silently all day, and no one knew. He did not know that this was the first threat of a much older thing, or that it had been waiting in him since before he could speak. He only knew that the house was a song he had memorized, and that he was hungry, and that today was the day of the school trip. They had been told about it for a week. A coach to London to a museum, £2 for the form, which Aunt Petunia had paid for Dudley, and then, after a tight silence at the kitchen table, for Harry as well, because the school had sent a letter and Petunia did not like letters from the school. Harry had folded the slip into a small square and kept it in his sock so it would not be lost. He had never been to London. He had never, that he could remember, been anywhere that was not Surrey, the school, or the inside of the cupboard. The museum, when they reached it, was the largest room Harry had ever stood inside. The ceiling went up and up into a gray light, and the floor was stone worn smooth by more feet than he could imagine, and the air smelled of dust and old metal and the wax they used on the glass cases. The teacher, Mrs. Cole, lined them up 2 by 2 and told them to keep their hands behind their backs and their voices low, and Dudley immediately put his hands in front of him and pressed them flat against the first case he came to, leaving smears, and no one told him to stop. Harry kept to the back. He had found over 7 years that the back of any line was the safest place to be. From the back you could see everyone, and no one looked for you there. They moved through rooms of pottery and rooms of coins and a long gallery of armor that stood empty in the shapes of men, and Harry trailed a step behind, reading the room the way he read the house. The stone floor had a pitch when you walked it, a soft round note. The glass cases had a higher one when the children's voices struck them. Somewhere far off a heavy door opened and shut, and the whole hall took a breath and let it go. He could have shut his eyes and known the size of the place from the way it answered. Then they came to the last room before the stairs, a smaller gallery off the main hall, and Harry stopped, because the room was making a sound that none of the others had made. It was very quiet. It was so quiet that at first he thought he had imagined it, the way you imagine the sea in a shell, but it did not stop when he held his breath. It came from a single case in the center of the room, set apart from the wall on a black plinth, lit from above so that the metal inside it threw a hard, cold light. A long object lay on dark cloth behind the glass. Harry came closer, slow, while the other children pressed on toward the stairs and the promise of lunch, and Mrs. Cole counted heads at the doorway and did not count carefully. The thing in the case was a bell, not a bell shaped like the ones in church, with a wide skirt and a tongue inside, but a tall, narrow cone of dark iron, taller than Harry's arm, its surface covered in close rows of marks. The marks were not letters, he knew. They were angular, deep-cut, and they ran in lines that climbed the bell from base to crown, and here and there a mark was struck through with a slash or doubled or set lower than its neighbors, as if the marks were not only meant to be seen but to be measured against one another. Below the case a small printed card read, Warbell Goblinrot C1612, recovered from the Second Rising, purpose unknown. Harry did not read the card. He was listening to the bell. It was humming. Under the glass, untouched, with no clapper and no hand near it, the iron held a single low note so faint that the room had to be silent to let it through, and the room was silent, and so Harry heard it. It was not the note of metal struck. It was the note of metal that wanted to be struck and had been waiting a very long time. He had heard the house wait like that in the cupboard on the worst nights when he held very still and the dark seemed to lean toward him. He knew the feeling of a thing that was holding its breath. He hummed the note back. He did it without thinking, the way he answered the kettle and the pipes, a soft, tuneless sound in the back of his throat, pitched to match the iron. He was good at matching. He had been matching things all his life. He found the note and held it and bent it the way the bell seemed to want, a little down at the end, a little rough, the way the marks on the iron were struck through and doubled, as if the sound was supposed to break and gather and break again. The bell answered. It was not loud. That was the thing he would remember after, when much larger and louder things had happened to him. That the first time in his life the world reached back and touched him, it did it gently. The hum in the iron swelled. The faint note he had been chasing rose to meet his own, and the two sounds locked together and became one, and the air in front of the case went cold, a hard clean cold like the cold off a window in winter, and a thin line of light ran up the bell from base to crown, mark to mark, as if his voice were a finger drawn along the rows and each mark lit as it was named. Harry stopped humming. The light held one moment longer, then sank back into the iron, and the cold drew in, and the bell was only a bell again, dark behind the glass, except that now it was no longer waiting. It had been answered. He could hear the difference. The note was gone out of it, the way a held breath is gone once it is let go. He became aware that he was not alone. A man stood in the doorway that led deeper into the museum, the staff door, the one the children were not meant to use. He was short. That was the first thing. He was no taller than Harry, perhaps shorter, but he was not a child, and he was not a small man either, not in any way that a man could be small. His face was long and clever and deeply lined, the skin gray-brown like old paper, and his ears came to points, and his eyes were black all the way through with no white at the edges, and those eyes were fixed on Harry with an attention so total that Harry felt it like a hand laid flat against his chest. He wore a dark suit, very plain, very well made, and white gloves, and over the gloves on his right hand a single ring of dull iron. He held a clipboard against his side, and he had clearly come into the room to do something ordinary with it, and he had forgotten the clipboard entirely. For a long moment neither of them moved. "Do that again," the man said. His voice was low and rough, with an accent Harry had never heard. The consonants struck hard like the marks on the bell. Harry did not do it again. 7 years had taught him that when an adult told him to do a thing in a voice like that, the thing was usually a trap, and the safest answer was none at all. He looked at the man, and the man looked at him, and the bell stood cold between them. "I'm not allowed in here," Harry said, which was true, and which was also the thing he had decided to say instead of any of the truer things crowding behind it. The man's black eyes flicked once to the doorway where Mrs. Cole's voice could be heard counting children in the hall beyond, then back to Harry, and something in his long face changed, not softened exactly, but sharpened, the way Uncle Vernon's face sharpened when he found money he had thought was lost. "You made it sing," the man said. "Do you know what you did?" "It was already singing," Harry said. "I only answered it." The man went very still. Harry had a great deal of practice in reading stillness, and he read this one carefully, and what he read was not anger and was not the ordinary boredom of adults. It was something he had no word for yet. It was the stillness of a person who has spent his whole life looking for a thing, and has, in a museum on a Tuesday with a clipboard under his arm, found it standing 4 feet tall in a hand-me-down coat. "Was already singing," the man repeated slowly, as if Harry had said something in a language he was translating one word at a time. "You heard it singing, couldn't you?" "No," said the man. "No living person I have ever met could hear that bell sing. I have stood in front of it for an hour at a stretch, more days than you have been alive, and I have heard nothing at all. It is the great sorrow of my office that I cannot." He took a step into the room. His iron-ringed hand had tightened on the clipboard. "What is your name, boy?" And Harry, who had been about to give a false one, because a false name cost nothing and the truth had always cost a great deal, found that he did not. He did not know why. Perhaps it was the cold still hanging in the air where the bell had answered him. Perhaps it was that this was the first adult in his memory who had wanted something from him that was not silence, obedience, or his absence. Perhaps it was only that the man had not once looked at his clothes. "Harry," he said. "Harry," the man said, tasting it. "Harry what?" Mrs. Cole's voice rose in the hall. "And where is the Potter boy? Has anyone—" Harry Potter, get out here this instant. We're leaving." The man went white. Harry saw it happen, the gray-brown skin draining to the color of ash, and he did not understand it, but he marked it, because people did not usually go white at the sound of his name. They went tired or annoyed, or they did not react at all. They did not look as though the floor had moved. "Potter," the man said in a whisper now, and the word had a great deal of weight on it, more weight than a name should carry. "You are Harry Potter." "I have to go," Harry said. The man moved fast then, faster than Harry expected, crossing the room in 3 short strides, and Harry braced for a hand on his collar, but the hand did not come. The man stopped just short of him and went down, not all the way to one knee but close, bending so that his black eyes were level with Harry's green ones, and he spoke quickly and quietly, the way you speak when there is very little time and a great deal that must be said. "Listen to me. My name is Nagnok. I am keeper of a place you have never heard of, that keeps things the world has forgotten how to use, and you have just done a thing that I did not believe any creature alive could still do. I am going to find you again. Do you understand me? Whatever happens, wherever they take you, I am going to find you, and I am going to ask you to listen to something, and all you will have to do is tell me what you hear. That is all. Do you understand, Harry Potter?" "I understand," Harry said, because it was easier than not, and because some part of him, the part that had spent 7 years in a dark cupboard reading the song of a house that did not want him, had heard in the rough, strange voice the one thing it had never been offered, that something he could do was worth crossing a room for. "Good," said Nagnok. He rose. He was looking at Harry as though committing him to a ledger. Go, say nothing of this. Frost on a bell is not a thing children are believed about." Harry went. At the doorway he looked back once, and the short man in the dark suit was standing beside the case with his iron-ringed hand pressed flat to the glass, his head bowed, his lips moving, and the bell behind the glass was silent, and would stay silent, because its one note had been spent on a boy who was not supposed to be in the room. The coach ride back to Surrey was long and grey. Dudley was sick into a paper bag near Croydon and had to be moved to the front, and the other children sang the songs children sing on coaches, the ones with no melody to speak of and too many verses, and Harry sat at the back with his forehead against the cold window and did not sing. He was thinking about the bell. He was thinking about the way the marks had been struck through and doubled, and how that had told his voice where to break, and he understood in the wordless way he understood most things that the marks were not decoration. The marks were instructions. Someone had written down a sound, the way Mrs. Cole wrote sums on the board, and the bell had been waiting more than 300 years for someone to read them back. He did not have the words for any of this. He was 7. But he had the shape of it, and the shape stayed with him through the grey miles, and when the coach let them out at the school and Aunt Petunia's car was not there, she had forgotten, or had decided he could walk, which amounted to the same thing. He walked the 2 miles home in the failing light, humming the bell's note under his breath, low and rough, bending it down at the end, and the street lamps came on one by one as he passed beneath them, and that was probably only the hour. And probably had nothing to do with him at all. The Dursleys did not ask about the trip. This was a mercy, and Harry treated it as one. He made himself a slice of bread in the kitchen while Uncle Vernon watched the news and Aunt Petunia clipped coupons and Dudley played a game in the front room that involved a great deal of shouting, and then he was sent to the cupboard, and he went, and he pulled the thin blanket up to his chin in the dark and lay listening to the house. The third board from the bottom of the stairs was flat and cracked, the pipes ticked, the kettle downstairs ticked as it cooled, and under all of it, very faint, almost not there at all, Harry could hear a new sound, and it took him a long time lying in the dark to understand that the new sound was inside his own chest. It was the bell's note. It had not left him on the coach. It had come home in him the way a tune comes home in you after you have heard it once, and it was waiting, the way the bell had waited, for him to answer it. He pursed his lips and hummed it, soft, into the dark of the cupboard. The cold came. It came the way it had come in the museum, a clean hard cold off the bare boards above his head, and in the absolute black under the stairs, a thin line of pale light traced itself along the wood, mark to mark, except that there were no marks there, only the grain of the cheap pine, and the light followed the grain as if the grain were a row of instructions and his voice were a finger drawn along it, and then the light sank away and the cold drew in and the cupboard was only a cupboard again. Harry lay still. His heart was going hard. He was not frightened. He would think about that later, that his very first instinct had not been fear, but he was awake all the way through in a manner he had never been before, as if he had spent 7 years in a house with one room he had not known about and had just put his hand on the door. "Whatever happens," the short man had said, "wherever they take you, I am going to find you." No one had ever come back for Harry. No one had ever promised to. He did not believe it exactly, but he held the bell's note in his chest where the man could not take it back, and he turned onto his side, and he hummed it once more very quietly, and the cold answered him in the dark, and somewhere under the world, though he could not have known this, and would not learn it for years, something vast and old and bound stirred in its long sleep, and turned its blind face toward the small new sound, the way a sleeper turns toward a voice it almost knows. In the days that followed, Harry watched for the man. He did not expect to see him. Promises made to Harry were a kind of weather. They came and went and left nothing behind. But he had learned to watch all the same, and so he marked the unfamiliar car parked across from the school on Thursday, and the man in the long coat who stood too long at the bus stop on Friday and did not get on any bus, and the way Aunt Petunia on Saturday morning opened the front door to take in the milk and went rigid on the step and then came back inside and locked the door and stood with her back against it, her face the color of the milk in her hand. "Vernon," she said in the flat, careful voice she used when something had gone wrong that was, in her mind, Harry's fault. There was something in the garden." "What sort of something?" said Uncle Vernon, not looking up from his paper. "A little man," Aunt Petunia said, "by the roses. He had a Vernon, he had pointed ears." Uncle Vernon did look up then. His face, which was usually the color of corned beef, went a deeper shade, and his small eyes moved, without his head moving, to the door of the cupboard under the stairs, where Harry sat on his cot with the door open an inch, listening. "It's the boy," Uncle Vernon said. "It's something to do with the boy. It always is. Pointed ears. I won't have it, Petunia. I won't have those people coming round here looking in the windows, frightening you on your own step. We took him in. We fed him. And this is what comes of it." Harry, behind the door, said nothing. He had a great deal of practice at saying nothing. But inside, where the Dursleys could not reach, the bell's note rang once, clear and cold, and he understood that the man called Nagnock had kept his word, and that the world he had touched in the museum had a thickness to it and weight, and that it was now standing in the garden by the roses with its pointed ears, having found him exactly as it had said it would. That night the letter came. Not the letter that would come later, years later, in a flood of identical envelopes that would drive Uncle Vernon to a rock in the sea. This was a single letter, and it did not come by owl. It came by goblin, which Harry would only understand the meaning of much later. He woke in the cupboard to the sound of the front door, and the front door was not the front door's usual sound. Someone had opened it from the outside without a key, without forcing it, simply opened it the way you open a door that has decided to be open. And Harry lay still and listened to two sets of footsteps come into the hall, Uncle Vernon's heavy tread above the cupboard, sharp with fear, and another, lighter, slower, deliberate, that made no notes in the boards at all, as if the visitor weighed nothing or chose to. "You will take this," said a voice Harry knew, rough and low, the consonants struck like marks on iron. "And you will give it to the boy, and you will tell him nothing of your own, because your own is nothing, and what is written here is not." "Now see here," Uncle Vernon began, in the bullying register he used on shopkeepers and Harry. "I don't know who you think you are, coming into a man's house in the dead of, I am Nagnok, son of Nagrod," said the voice, and it did not rise, but the temperature of the hall seemed to drop, and Harry, behind the door, felt the cold he was coming to know, of the annal deep, under the stone of London, where your kind has kept its gold for 900 years and trusted us to count it. "You have a great deal of gold there, Mr. Dursley, a surprising amount for a man who took in a charity case and put him in a cupboard. We notice these things. We are very good at noticing where gold has been and where it has gone." A pause, exactly weighted. "Give the boy the letter." There was a silence, and then Uncle Vernon's tread retreated fast up the stairs, and the lighter footsteps came to stand directly outside the cupboard door, and Harry sat up on his cot in the dark with his blanket around his shoulders and his heart going hard and clean. The door opened. Nagnok stood in the dim hall light, no taller than the doorframe was wide, his black eyes finding Harry at once in the dark as though the dark were nothing to him. "Hello, Harry Potter," he said. "I told you I would come back." Harry looked at him. There was a great deal he might have said. What he said was, "The bell came home with me, the note, I can still hear it. I made the cold come in here in the dark, the same as in the museum." He did not know why he told the man this. He had never told anyone anything. But Nagnok went very still again, that listening stillness, and then he did a thing no adult had done in Harry's memory. He came down to Harry's level, there in the doorway of the cupboard, and he looked at the boy with something Harry had no name for and would later understand was awe. "You made the cold come," Nagnok said, "here, with nothing, with no bell, no iron, no mark to read from." He shook his head slowly. "Do you understand what you're telling me, child?" "No, how could you?" "There is no one left alive to have told you." He drew a breath. "Listen to me. There is a place under the city where my people keep the things they have forgotten how to use. Songs, mostly. We can read them. We have read them for 300 years, every mark, and we cannot make them do what they were written to do, because we lost the way of the saying of them in a war a long time ago, when your kind broke us and took the saying away. And tonight in a museum, a 7-year-old boy with a scar on his head answered a war bell that has been silent since before his great-great-grandfather was born." He held out the letter. It was heavy, cream-colored, and where it should have borne a stamp it bore a seal of dull iron pressed into red wax. "This is a request, not a summons. We do not summon the people we hope to honor. It asks that you come to us with the permission of your guardians and hear a single song and tell us what. That is all we ask for now." Harry took the letter. It was warm, as if it had been near a fire, though the hall was cold with the cold he himself could call. He held it in both hands. "They won't let me," he said. It was not a complaint. It was a fact, the way the third board was cracked. "My aunt and uncle, they don't let me do things." Nagnok smiled. It was not a comfortable smile. It had a great many teeth in it, all of them pointed, and Harry found, somewhat to his own surprise, that he liked it. "Mr. Dursley," Nagnok said, not turning his head, raising his voice just enough to climb the stairs, "would you like to discuss the matter of your gold? Or would you prefer that your nephew be permitted to take a Saturday's outing, now and again, with a respectable institution of finance at no cost to yourself, and with the firm understanding that the little men will then have no further reason to stand among your roses where the neighbors can see them?" There was a long silence from the top of the stairs. "Take him," said Uncle Vernon's voice, strangled. "Take him whenever you like, just keep them off the lawn. The number 5s have started to talk." "Done," said Nagnok pleasantly, and to Harry low, with the smile still showing its teeth. "You see, it is only ever a question of finding the note a man is already singing and answering it. He sings gold and fear, easy music. Yours, I think, will be harder." He straightened. "Saturday, then, a car will come, where whatever you like, it will not matter where we are going." His black eyes moved once over the cupboard, the cot, the thin blanket, the cracked board above, and the smile went out of his face entirely, and what replaced it was cold, and not the cold Harry could call, but a colder one that had nothing to do with bells. "It will not matter at all," he said again, quietly, "where you have come from, I promise you that." He left as he had come, on feet that made no sound, and the front door closed itself behind him, and the house settled into its ordinary song, the boards, the pipes, the kettle ticking as it cooled. Harry sat in the cupboard with the heavy letter in his hands and the iron seal cold under his thumb, and he did not sleep, and he did not try to. He held the bell's note in his chest where no one could take it, and for the first time in his life he counted the days until a Saturday, not away from a thing but toward it. When the car came, and it did come, black and silent, with a driver who never once turned his head, it took him not toward London at first, but in a long looping way through Surrey, as if to be sure no one followed, and Harry watched the hedges go by and held the note and was not afraid. Aunt Petunia had watched from the front window with her arms folded and her mouth a thin line, and Dudley had pressed his face to the glass, and neither of them had said goodbye, and Harry had not expected them to. He had the letter, he had the note, he had for the first time somewhere to go. The city, when they reached it, was a roar of sound, and Harry read it as they drove, the deep idling note of the traffic, the higher whine of the brakes, the great hollow ring of the bridges, all of it a song so much larger than the song of Privet Drive that he sat forward in his seat with his palms flat on his knees and drank it in. The car turned off a broad, bright street into a narrow, dark one, and then into a lane so narrow the walls nearly brushed the mirrors, and stopped before a tall building of white stone with bronze doors, and over the doors, in letters Harry could read, was the single word GRINGOTTS, and under that word, in marks he could not read but which made the bell's note stir in his chest, was a line of the close angular cutting he had seen on the war bell, struck through and doubled, climbing toward the roof. Nagnock was waiting at the doors. He wore the same plain dark suit and the iron ring, and he did not smile this time. He bowed instead, a short, precise bow, the kind Harry had only seen on television, given by people to kings. "Harry Potter," he said, "welcome to the door of the annal deep. Beyond it lie 900 years of what your kind has stored and what mine has kept. 'Neath all of that, where no wizard has set foot in 3 centuries and no goblin has heard a true word sung in longer, lie the songs we lost." He turned and set his iron-ringed hand against the bronze, and the doors swung inward onto a hall so vast and so full of cold pale light that Harry stopped on the threshold and simply looked. "Come," said Nagnock, "let us find out, you and I, what it is that you can hear." The hall beyond the doors was the size of a cathedral and built like a vault. Goblins sat at high desks along both walls, scratching in ledgers with long quills, weighing coins on brass scales, examining gems through lenses screwed into one eye, and not one of them looked up as Harry passed, except that every single one of them, he understood at once, knew exactly where he was. He could feel their attention the way he had learned to feel Uncle Vernon's mood through the boards. The whole vast room was reading him the way he read rooms. He read it back. The floor was marble, and it had a deep round note when Nagnock's shoes struck it. But under the marble there was another note, lower, older, that did not come from the floor at all but from somewhere far beneath it, and Harry slowed and tilted his head, the way he had in the museum, and the bell's note in his chest leaned toward the lower one as a compass leans north. "You hear it," Nagnock said. He had stopped, watching the boy's face. It was not a question, but Harry answered it anyway. "There's something under the floor," Harry said, "singing like the bell, but bigger, a lot bigger, and it—" He searched for the word. He was 7, and the word he wanted did not exist in any vocabulary he had been given, so he reached for the nearest one. "It's asleep, it's singing in its sleep." Every quill in the hall had stopped. The silence that fell was not the silence of a quiet room. It was the silence of 300 goblins ceasing all at once to pretend they were not listening. Nagnock did not move for a long moment. When he spoke, his rough voice had gone very low and very careful, the way a person speaks near a sleeping thing he has been told never to wake. "What you are hearing," he said, "no living creature has reported hearing in 300 years. Not goblin, not wizard. We know it is there because our oldest law tells us it is there, and our oldest law tells us that we must never, on pain of the ending of everything we have built, attempt to wake it." He glanced down once at the marble, and something moved behind his black eyes that Harry would not understand for a long time, and which he would later learn to call dread. "You will not speak of it again in this hall. You will not hum toward the floor. Do you understand me, Harry Potter? Whatever you hear under the stone, you let it sleep." "All right," Harry said. He did not argue. He had spent 7 years learning when a warning was real, and this one was real all the way through. He could hear it in the man's voice, the tremor under the iron. But he kept the fact where he kept the true things, that beneath the bank, beneath the gold, beneath everything, something enormous was singing in its sleep, and that he, alone among all the living, had heard it answer the moment his foot touched the floor. Nagnock led him on past the high desks to a smaller door of black iron set in the far wall, worked all over with the close angular marks, and here he stopped and laid his hand flat against it and was still, and the marks lit one by one under his palm, mark to mark, climbing, and Harry watched and understood that the door was a song too, a short one, a song that meant only open, and that Nagnock could read it but could not sing it. And that this was the whole sorrow of his people in a single small door, that they had written the world in music and then forgotten the tune. "It opens to my office," Nagnock said, "because the office is shallow, and shallow things still answer the touch of those who remember their names. But the deep does not open to a hand, the deep opens to a voice, and we have no voice." The door swung inward on darkness. "We have searched a long time, Harry Potter. We have tested wizards and squibs and the children of squibs, every singer and bard and false prophet who claimed an ear, and they heard nothing, all of them every year for 300 years. And then a charity case from Surrey put his lips together in front of a bell in a glass case and gave it back its voice. He stood aside and gestured Harry through into the dark, where the cold was already gathering to meet him. "So you will forgive an old keeper," he said, and his rough voice cracked just once on the words, "if his hands are not quite steady tonight." Harry stepped through into the dark, and the bell's note rose in his chest to meet the great sleeping song under the stone, and the two sounds touched far apart like a child calling across a valley to something that has waited the whole length of the world to be called, and the iron all around him very faintly, the moment his foot came down, began to hum. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, The Lost War Songs. The Annal Deep was not a room. Harry understood this within the first 100 steps, the way he had understood that the museum was larger than the school, not by being told, but by the way the sound changed. Nagnak's office had been small and shallow, a stone box with a desk and a lamp and a single shelf of ledgers, and they had passed through it quickly to a stair behind a second iron door, and the stair went down. It went down a long way. The walls were dressed stone at first, then rough stone, then no longer stone that anyone had cut but stone that had simply been there before anyone came, and the air grew cold and still and old, and every dozen steps a lamp burned in a bracket, blue-white, throwing no heat. Harry counted the steps to 200 and then stopped counting, because counting was a thing he did to make a place smaller in his mind, and this place did not want to be made smaller. It wanted to be enormous. He let it. At the bottom the stair opened without warning into the dark. Harry stood on a stone landing and could not see the far wall, because there was no far wall, or it was too distant to throw back the light. The lamps ended here. What light there was came from the things themselves. Set into the rock on every side, rising in tiers that climbed past the reach of his eye and dropping in tiers that fell past the reach of his feet, were shelves, not wooden shelves but ledges cut from the living stone, and on the ledges lay the iron. Bells like the one in the museum, and tablets, and long graven rods, and rings the size of cartwheels, and plates, and things he had no name for, all of it dark metal worked over every surface with the close angular marks, and all of it faintly, faintly alight, each piece holding its own dim glow the way a coal holds heat after the fire is out. The glow was not steady. It moved. Across the whole vast face of the deep the lights pulsed and shifted, slow, out of time with one another, so that the dark seemed to breathe, and it was singing. This was the thing Harry would try for years afterward to describe and fail. The hall was full of sound, and the sound was almost too quiet to hear, and it was not one sound but thousands, each piece of iron holding its own note, and the notes did not agree. They were not a chord, they were not even a tune. They were the wreckage of 10,000 tunes, each piece humming the ghost of the song carved into it, none of them complete, all of them broken off in the middle of a phrase 300 years ago and held there, waiting the way the bell had waited, the way the cupboard had waited, multiplied past counting until the whole deep was one enormous held breath that no living throat had been able to release. Harry put his hand over his mouth. He was crying, and he had not decided to, and he could not have said why, except that it was the saddest sound he had ever heard, and the most beautiful, and he was 7, and no one had ever taken him anywhere before. "Yes," said Nagnok very quietly beside him. "That is the right thing to do here. Most who come down do not weep. Most who come down hear nothing at all." He did not look at Harry. He was looking out into the breathing dark, and his long face in the iron light was the face of a person looking at something he loves and cannot help. "This is the Annal Deep. The word means the deep accounting, the place where everything is written down. Your people think we are bankers because gold is the only writing they trouble to learn, but gold is the shallowest thing we keep. This," he lifted his iron-ringed hand toward the dark, "this is the rest of the account. Every song my people ever made, every working. Every word of power we sang when we were a nation that sang." He lowered the hand. "And not one of us can read a line of it aloud. We are the keepers of a library in a language we have forgotten how to speak. We dust it, we catalog it, we pass the catalog from father to daughter, and we listen all our lives to music we cannot answer, and we call it our inheritance, and it is really our grief." Harry wiped his face with the back of his wrist. The 1,000 broken notes pressed at him from every side, each one a little door standing ajar onto a room with no light in it, and the wanting of them was almost a physical thing, a pull on the center of his chest, the way a held note pulls at you until you finish it. "What happened?" he asked. "How do you lose how to say something?" Nagnok was quiet for a moment. When he answered, his voice had changed. It had the flatness of a thing recited, a wound worn smooth by being told. 300 and some years ago," he said, "we rose, not for the first time and not the last, but the worst of all the times. The histories your kind keep call it the second rising. We call it the year the songs went out. We were strong then, Harry Potter, stronger than we have ever let your people remember. The songs you hear breaking around you were not made to be pretty. They were made for war. A canto sung true could turn a man's own blade to water in his hand, or raise a wall of iron out of bare ore, or call the deep forges up to walk. We did not need wands, we had never needed wands, we had this." He gestured again, and the breathing dark answered, faint, "And we lost because your kind learned at last the one thing that could beat a singing people. They learned to take the singing away." "How?" Patiently. Nagnok's mouth thinned. The treaty that ended the Rising was not signed in blood, it was signed in tongues. Among its terms, buried in the terms, where our negotiators in their exhaustion did not weigh it heavily enough, was a clause that forbade the teaching of the war tongue to any goblin child, not the writing of it. The writing they let us keep, because writing without saying is a tomb, and a tomb frightens no one. But the saying, the living passing of it from the mouth of one who knew to the ear of one who did not yet, that they forbade, and that they enforced for 100 years with wand law and with the gallows, until every goblin who had been taught the true sound of a single canto as a child was dead, and there was no one left to teach the next, and the clause did not need enforcing any longer, because you cannot enforce a thing that has already happened to everyone. He looked at Harry. Do you understand the cleverness of it? They did not burn our library. Burning a library makes martyrs and copies. They let us keep every book and merely waited for everyone who could read the books allowed to die of old age. It took less than one of our lifetimes. We hold the war songs of an age in our hands, every mark perfect, and they are as silent to us as that bell was silent to me for 30 years. We can describe the lock in exquisite detail. We have lost the shape of the key. Harry looked out at the 10,000 broken songs, and something in him that was older than 7, something that had spent its whole short life reading the locks of a house that did not want him, sharpened to a point. But the lock is the key, he said. Nagnak turned his head. What did you say? The marks. Harry was not entirely sure where the thought was coming from. It was arriving the way the bell's note had arrived, from somewhere underneath the part of him that used words. You said you can read every mark, so you can see where they're struck through and doubled and set low. On the bell, that's what told me where to break the note and where to bend it down and where to gather it. The marks aren't just the words. They're the saying, too. They're written right there. He frowned, reaching. You've been reading them like the words of a song. But they're more like, he searched and found it in the only place he had ever seen music written, the hymn board at the school assembly he was made to attend. They're more like the words and the tune at the same time. You've only been reading the words. The silence that followed was so complete that Harry could hear far below the slow pulse of the iron light the breathing of the deep. We have read these marks, Nagnak said at last, very slowly, for 300 years, the finest minds of my people. Keepers before me whose names are cut into the stone of this landing, and you are telling me, a child in his first hour underground, that we have been reading half of what is written and calling it the whole. I don't know, Harry said honestly. I only know what the bell told me. It told me where to break. Nagnak looked at him for a long moment. Then he did a strange thing. He laughed, a short, rough bark of a laugh that came back to them off the unseen walls, thinned to a whisper and returned, and he pressed the back of his iron-ringed hand briefly against his eyes. 300 years, he said again to no one, to the dark. 300 years, and the answer is that we were too proud to imagine we had missed something. We read the marks as wizards read runes, for meaning, for spelling, for the word. It never occurred to us to read them as instructions to the throat, because, and here his voice broke a little, and Harry understood that he had touched, without meaning to, the oldest sore in the oldest part of this old creature, because to read them that way you must believe the saying can still be recovered. And we stopped believing that a long time ago. We turned the war songs into a museum, because a museum is a thing you can bear to keep. Hope is a thing you cannot. He shook himself, and the keeper came back into his face, the dry, precise official who had bowed at the bronze doors. Come, he said, before I bring this to the council, and I must bring it to the council, child, you have just turned 3 centuries of doctrine on its head, and they will want to break it apart before they believe it. Before any of that, I will know whether the bell was a fluke. There is a test that costs nothing and proves everything. He led Harry along the stone landing to where a low pedestal stood alone, a little apart from the breathing shelves, and on the pedestal lay a single iron tablet no larger than a school slate, its surface carved with perhaps 30 of the angular marks in 3 short rows. This is the smallest true canto we possess. The keepers call it the door word, though it opens no door we have ever found. 31 marks. We know what every one of them means. We have known for 300 years. We have never once made it do anything at all. He stepped back and folded his hands, and his black eyes were very bright. Read it, Harry Potter, not the meaning, the saying, tell me what you hear. Harry came to the pedestal. The tablet was cold and it was humming, the same held breath hum as the bell, but smaller, neater, a single tidy phrase broken off at its end. He bent over it. He did not read it the way you read a sentence, left to right, because the marks did not lie down in lines that way. They climbed and crowded and leaned on one another. He read it the way he read the boards above the cupboard, all at once, as a shape, a pattern of weights and gaps, and the longer he looked, the more it came apart for him, the way a knot comes apart once you find the one loop the whole thing hangs on. The marks were not in a row, they were in a stress pattern. He could see it now plainly, the way you suddenly see the picture hidden in the puzzle and then cannot unsee it. The doubled marks were the strong beats, the struck-through marks were the breaks, the low-set marks pulled the note down and the high-set ones pushed it up, and running underneath all of it, threaded through the whole 31, was something he had no word for but recognized completely, because he had felt it every day of his life. It was the difference between a thing said and a thing meant. It was the weight a sentence carried when it was true. The marks did not only tell the throat what note to make, they told the throat how much of the truth to put behind it. It's not just the sound, Harry said. His own voice sounded strange to him, far away. The bell, I thought it was just the sound, where to break it and bend it, but it's more than that. The marks here, the ones underneath, they're telling you how much you have to mean it. He looked up. You can't just make the noise, you have to mean it. That's the part you can't fake. That's why nobody could do it even when they read all the marks right, because they were saying it like a word, and it isn't a word, it's an. He reached, and the word came up out of somewhere deep. A word he was fairly sure he had never spoken aloud. It's an oath. You have to say it like an oath, like you died before you took it back. Nagnak had gone absolutely motionless. Sing it, he whispered. If you can hear all of that, child, if you can truly hear all of that, then sing it. The door word, 31 marks, mean every one. Harry looked back down at the tablet. He was afraid now, for the first time since the museum, not of the marks, but of what it would mean if he was right, because he had spent 7 years learning that being right about things adults could not do was the most dangerous position a small person could occupy. But the canto was humming, and it had been humming for 300 years, and it wanted, with a wanting he could feel in his teeth, to be finished. He took a breath and found the first note where the first doubled mark told him it lay, low and a little rough, and he began to sing. It was not a song the way a hymn is a song. It had no comfortable shape, no rhyme he could lean on, no melody that wanted to be liked. It climbed and broke and gathered and dropped, ugly and exact, each note pinned to its mark, and the hard part, the part that took everything he had, was the meaning. He could feel where the canto demanded it, where a mark sat low and heavy under the line, and the whole phrase would die unless he put the truth of himself behind it, unless he sang it the way he had, exactly once in his life, said I won't, to Uncle Vernon's raised hand, and known he meant it, and known it might cost him. He sang the doorword like that. He sang it the way you say a thing you will not take back. On the 11th mark, the tablet grew warm under his hands. On the 19th, the hum in the iron stopped being a hum and became a voice, faint, joining his, an octave down, as if the tablet had been waiting 300 years to be given the first note so that it could remember the rest. On the 31st mark, the last, a doubled mark struck through, which meant, he understood now without being told, end it and mean the ending. Harry sang the note up and broke it clean, and the doorword closed. The light came all at once. It ran out of the tablet and up Harry's arms and stood in the air around the pedestal in lines and angles, the marks themselves, the whole canto written in cold blue-white fire hanging in the dark of the deep, and it held there, complete, a thing that had not been complete since before the year the songs went out, and the cold came with it, the clean hard cold, rolling out across the landing in a wave that made the lamp flames on the distant stair gutter and lane. And every piece of iron in the annel deep, every bell, every tablet, every graven rod and cartwheel ring on every ledge rising and falling past the reach of sight, answered. They did not sing the doorword, they could not, it was not their song, but they rang. 10,000 broken phrases struck their one-held note at once, all of them, the whole breathing library crying out together in a single vast shapeless chord of recognition, as if to say, one of us has been finished, it can be done, we are not only a tomb. The sound went up through the rock. Harry felt it go up, felt it pass through the soles of his feet and the roots of his teeth and out the crown of his head, and far above them, 300 feet up under the marble floor of the bank, the goblins at their high desks would later swear that the whole hall had hummed for the length of a held breath and then fallen still, and not one of them would be able to say why their eyes had filled. And far below the landing, far below the lowest ledge, beneath the foundation of the deep itself, in the dark where the oldest law said no one must ever sing, something enormous opened one eye. Harry felt that too. He was the only one who did. The blue fire of the doorward still hung around him, fading now, and the great cord of the ringing iron was dying away into the dark, and underneath it, underneath everything, he felt the deep sleeping song shift. It did not wake, not yet. But it had heard him. It had heard a true canto sung true for the first time in 300 years, and it had turned its blind face toward the sound the way it had turned toward him in the cupboard, only nearer now and vaster and no longer entirely asleep. A single low note rose from the foundation of the world, so deep he felt rather than heard it, a note that did not belong to any tablet on any shelf, and it held for a moment, considering, and then it sank back down into the dark. The fire went out, the cold drew in, the deep fell silent, truly silent, the held breath gone out of all of it at once, and then slowly, one by one, the broken songs resumed their waiting hum. Harry took his hands off the tablet. They were shaking. He turned and found Nagnak on his knees. The old goblin had gone down onto both knees on the stone landing, and his iron-ringed hand was pressed flat to his chest, and he was weeping without any sound at all, his black eyes streaming, his lined face turned up toward the boy in the fading fire, and Harry, who had never in his life made anyone weep for any reason but anger, did not know what to do, and so he did nothing and stood and let the old keeper look at him. 300 years, Nagnak said, but it was a different thing in his mouth now. It was not grief now, but something that had broken open on the other side of grief. 300 years, and I have lived to hear it, to hear a song of my father's finished. He bowed his head. Whatever else comes of this, child, and a great deal will come of this, more than you can know, and not all of it kind, you should understand that you have already given my people back a thing they had buried so deep they had stopped letting themselves want it. You have given us back the possibility of ourselves. He rose unsteadily and wiped his face, and when he had mastered it, he looked at Harry with the old dry keeper's eyes again, and underneath them something new and fierce. "Ow," he said, "I must take you up out of here very quickly, and we must both of us think extremely hard, because you did two things just now, Harry Potter, and only one of them was a miracle." "What was the other one?" Harry asked. Nagnock glanced down once at the stone beneath their feet, beneath which the deep note had risen and sunk. "You knocked," he said, "on a door my people have spent 300 years making certain stays shut, and something on the other side of it just knocked back." He took the boy by the shoulder, the first time anyone had touched Harry that day, and the touch was careful, almost reverent, and turned him toward the long stair up, and the lamps in the world, and they climbed together out of the breathing dark, and behind them on its pedestal the little tablet of the door word, which had been silent for 3 centuries, hummed softly to itself in the language it had just remembered how to speak. The wandless council met in a chamber that had never held a wand. Harry was not, at first, allowed inside. He sat on a stone bench in an antechamber while Nagnock went in, and through the iron door he could hear the shape of the thing without the words, the slow weight of voices arguing, a great many of them climbing and falling, and one voice that did not climb or fall but sat under the others like the cracked third board under the stairs, flat, heavy, immovable. He was good at reading rooms he could not see. This one was frightened. He could hear the fear in the way the voices crowded each other. People did not argue that fast about a thing they were not afraid of. Then the door opened, and a young goblin in a leather coat looked out at him with open dislike and said, "They want the boy," as though the boy were a parcel, and Harry got up and went in. The chamber was round and low and lit by the same cold lamps, and around its wall ran a stone bench, and on the bench sat perhaps 30 goblins, old and young, in the plain dark dress Harry was learning to expect, and at the center, behind a table of black iron with nothing on it at all, sat one goblin alone. He was not large, none of them were. But the room was arranged around him the way the bank's hall had been arranged around the deep note under the floor, everything bending toward him without seeming to, and Harry understood before anyone spoke that this was the one whose voice did not climb or fall. "I am Gornock," the goblin said. "I keep the wandless council, as Nagnock keeps the deep. You will not be offended if I do not call you honored guest. We do not yet know what you are." Eyes were not black like Nagnock's, they were a dark amber like old resin, and they did not blink often. "Nagnock, son of Nagrod, tells me you sang the door word. He tells me the deep rang. He tells me, and Nagnock has never in 40 years told me a thing that turned out false, which is the only reason this council is in session and not asleep, that a human child of 7 has done what no goblin has done since the songs went out." A pause, exactly weighted like a coin set down on a scale. "I would like very much to call him a liar. It would make my night considerably simpler. Sing it again, here. Now, there is a tablet behind you." Harry turned. Set in a niche in the chamber wall was a small iron plate, and it hummed the familiar broken hum, and he did not need to be told it was a true canto, because by now he could feel the difference between a true song and a dead one the way you can feel the difference between a held breath and an empty room. He could have refused. Some part of him, the cupboard part, the part that had survived 7 years by giving nothing away, wanted to refuse, because he was being tested by a roomful of frightened strangers, and he had learned what frightened people did with children who could do things they could not. But the canto was humming, and he had already learned that day that he could not bear to leave one unfinished, and that this was either the best thing about him or the most dangerous, and possibly both. He read the plate. It was longer than the door word, 40 marks, 50, and one phrase near the end was worn shallow where some keeper's thumb had traced it 10,000 times in despair, and Harry found the first note and sang. He felt the room change as he sang. He could not see it, his eyes were on the marks, but he could hear it, the way the crowded, frightened voices went, all at once, utterly silent, and then the way the silence itself changed quality, thickened, leaned toward him, 30 goblins ceasing to breathe in the same instant. The plate warmed, the plate answered. On the last mark the cold rolled out across the round chamber, and the lamps leaned, and a thin blue line of fire stood in the air, and held and faded, and the canto closed. For a long moment no one in the wandless council said anything at all. Then a goblin near the door stood up. He was heavy-set and richly dressed by the standards of the room, a chain of worked gold across his chest where the others wore none, and his face was not frightened. His face was furious, in the cold, controlled way of a creature whose worst fear has just been proven true. "There," he said, "there it is. You have all seen it now, so we may stop pretending. I am Coinwright Bargrim, and I speak for those of this council who would like to remember why the songs went out in the first place." He turned, slowly, taking in the whole bench. "They went out because they were death, not our death. The songs never killed us. They went out because every time in 900 years that our people remembered how to sing, The wizards came down on us with fire and gallows and broke us further than before and took more and left us less, until the only thing we had left that they would let us keep was their gold and their grudging tolerance, and we built 900 years of patient wealth on that tolerance, stone on stone, and it is the only roof over the head of every child in this nation. His voice did not rise. None of theirs did. Harry was learning that too. And now a human boy has sung a war song in the deep, and the deep has rung loud enough that I am told the cups jumped on the desks in the upper hall, and you sit here with wet eyes like children at a festival, and not one of you has asked the only question that matters. He pointed at Harry, not unkindly, which was somehow worse. When the wizards learn that the war songs can be sung again, and they will learn, they always learn, what do you imagine they will do? Honor us, or finish, at last, the work the treaty started, and make certain that this time the songs go out and stay out? The chamber stirred. Some of the goblins would not meet his eye, some nodded. Harry stood very still in the center and read all of it, the way he read everything, and what he read was that Coinwright Bargram was not a fool and was not, in any simple way, a villain, and that this made him far more dangerous than Uncle Vernon had ever been, because Uncle Vernon had only ever been afraid of small true things, and Bargram was afraid of a large true thing, and large true fears moved nations. "You are not wrong," said Gornuk from behind his empty iron table, and the room went quiet again. "That is the difficulty, Bargram, you are not wrong. If you were wrong, this would be easy." He turned the amber eyes on Harry. "Here is what is also true. For 300 years we have kept the deep as one keeps a grave, and called the keeping faithfulness, and it was not faithfulness, it was surrender on the longest possible schedule. We told ourselves we preserved the songs, we did not preserve them. A song you cannot sing is not preserved, it is embalmed, and tonight a child reached into the grave, and one of the dead sat up and spoke. He set his hands flat on the iron table. So we are not choosing, Bargram, between safety and danger. The danger is already here. It walked in tonight in borrowed shoes. We are choosing only whether the danger belongs to us or to whoever finds him next, and someone will find him next, because the deep rang, and I do not flatter myself that we are the only ones in the world with iron that remembers." His gaze moved once to Nagnok and back. "That is the whole of the matter. The boy is a key. The question before this council is not whether to lock the door again. The door is open. The question is whose hand the key is in by morning." There was a silence. Then Bargram said very quietly, "And you propose it be ours?" "I propose," said Gornuk, "that we offer the child a contract." The word went through the room like the cold went through the deep. Harry did not understand it yet. He would come to understand in the weeks ahead exactly what a goblin contract was and was not, that it was nothing like the slip in Aunt Petunia's drawer and everything like the oath he had felt threaded through the marks. But he understood the weight the room gave it, and he understood that Nagnok by the door had gone very still, the listening stillness, and was watching him across the chamber with something that was not quite hope and not quite fear but stood between them. "A contract binds both hands," Gornuk said to the room, but his amber eyes were on Harry now and stayed there. "It would bind the boy, to bring what he hears only here, to no other house, to no wizard, to no buyer. And it would bind us to keep him, to teach him, to set the whole weight of the nation between him and anyone who would take him or use him or open him up to see how he works." A pause. "He is 7, he cannot sign. But the old law has a provision for that older than the treaty, from the days when we still made battle friends, a provisional bond sworn by a sponsor of the deep, that the child may affirm or break when he comes of age and not before." His gaze did not waver. "I will not pretend to you, child, that this is for your sake. It is for ours. But I have kept this counsel a long time, and I have found that the contracts that hold are the ones where both hands need them, and you," and here, for the first time, something almost gentle moved in the resin-dark eyes, "you came down those stairs in shoes that were made for a larger boy, and you wept at our grief before you knew it was grief, and I do not think anyone above the ground has ever offered you a roof that was yours. We are offering you one. It is a cold roof. It is made of stone and law and old danger, but it is yours, and no one will take it, because taking it would mean taking on the whole nation, and the whole nation is a great deal to take on." He sat back. "Think on it. You need not answer tonight." Harry looked at him. He looked at Nagnok by the door, and at Bargram with his gold chain and his honest fear, and at the round chamber full of the oldest beings he had ever met, all of them, every one waiting on the word of a child in borrowed shoes, and he felt the thing he had felt in the cupboard on the night the letter came, only larger and surer. "I don't need to think," he said. "You should," said Gornuk. "I have," said Harry, "my whole life, about what I'd do if anyone ever offered." He found that his voice was steady, which surprised him, and that the room had gone silent to hear it. "I'll sign when I'm old enough. Until then I'll swear whatever the old law lets me swear. I won't take the songs anywhere else. I won't sell them. I don't even know who I'd sell them to." A small, dry thing he had not planned came out of him then. The first time in his life he had risked a joke in front of strangers. "Nobody's ever wanted anything I had before. I'm not going to give it to the first person who asks twice." And Gornuk, head of the Wandless Council, who had not been known to do so within the memory of most of the goblins in that room, laughed a short, hard, surprised bark, very like Nagnok's, and said, "No. No, I don't suppose you are," and looked at Nagnok, and something passed between the two old goblins that Harry could not read, and Gornuk said, "Then let it be a provisional bond, and Nagnok son of Nagrod will stand sponsor, since it is plainly already done in his heart whatever this council decides." And the matter for that night was settled, though Bargrim sat down slowly, and did not protest again, and watched Harry across the chamber with the steady, patient calculation of a creature who has lost a vote and begun, immediately, to plan the next one. Far away, in a tall, thin house in a quiet square in Bloomsbury, a man at a desk lifted his head. He was an old man, though not so old as he looked, with white hair combed flat and a face like a closed ledger, and he sat in a room lined floor to ceiling with objects that hummed and ticked and turned and watched, the accumulated catch of 40 years of patient hunting, each piece labeled in his own small hand. He had been an unspeakable once. He was nothing now officially, which was precisely the condition he had spent his retirement cultivating, because a man who is nothing officially can do a great many things that a man who is something cannot. Among the objects on his shelves was a long bar of gray metal, plain, unmarked, that he had bought 30 years ago from a dying collector who had bought it from a thief who had stolen it from the ruins of a goblin forge after the Second Rising. It did nothing. It had always done nothing. It was the great disappointment of his collection, the one lock to which he had never, in 40 years, found a key, and he kept it on the shelf at eye level above his desk precisely because it reproached him, and he found reproach clarifying. At 11 minutes past 9 that evening, the gray bar began to ring. It was not loud. He almost missed it under the ticking of the orrery and the soft respiration of the bottled wind he kept for cold mornings. But the man who had been an unspeakable had not survived 40 years of patient hunting by missing quiet things, and he set down his pen and he turned in his chair, and he watched the gray bar ring on its shelf, a thin, clear, sustained note, rising for the length of a held breath and then fall still. He sat for a long time after it stopped. Then he took down a fresh card from the drawer where he kept his fresh cards, and he uncapped his pen, and in his small, precise hand he wrote a single line and underlined it once, and pinned the card to the wall above the silent gray bar where he would see it every morning when he sat down to work. The card read, "Someone somewhere has remembered how to sing." Aurelius Greaves smiled, the way a closed ledger might smile if it found, after 40 years, that the books did not balance after all, and that the missing sum was very, very large. "At last," he said to the humming room. "At last, now who?" Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. Translating the unreadable, they began with the grammar because Harry insisted on it, and the goblins thought he was mad. He came every Saturday through that autumn and winter, and then, when the school holidays widened, 2 and 3 days at a stretch, and the black car learned the loop through Surrey so well that the driver no longer bothered with the longer detours. Nagnok had given him a room in the shallow halls, a real room, with a bed and a lamp and a door that locked from the inside, the first door in Harry's life that locked from his side rather than the other, and a key of cold iron, and on the first night Harry had lain in the narrow bed and listened to the whole bank breathe around him, the gold settling, the wards turning over in their sleep, and had not been able to sleep at all, not from fear but from the strangeness of being somewhere that wanted him to stay. By day he worked, and the work, as he conceived it, was not singing. "You want to sing the songs," he said to Nagnok in the cataloguing room off the deep where the keepers brought him the smaller tablets so he need not go down into the dark each time. "But that's like you want me to read out a whole book in a language nobody speaks, just by sounding out the letters. I might get the easy ones," the door word was short. "But the long ones, the real ones, I'll guess wrong, and a war song you guess wrong at is probably not a thing you want to be standing next to." He laid his small hand flat on the iron table over the marks. "I don't want to memorize the songs. I want to learn the language. Then I can read any of them. Then it's not a trick I do, it's a thing I know." Nagnok had looked at him for a long moment with the black unreadable eyes, and then he had gone without a word and come back with 3 keepers and a waxboard and every fragment in the catalogue marked partial. The broken-off ends, the single phrases, the cantos that survived in 2 and 3 copies that did not quite agree, and he had set them down in front of the boy and said, "Then teach us. We have the marks, you have the ear. Between us we have, for the first time in 300 years, both halves of the lock. Let us see what it opens." So they built the grammar. It went the way Harry did everything, which was sideways and from underneath. He could not have explained at the start what he was hearing. He only knew that when he ran his eye down a column of marks, certain shapes wanted to be high and certain shapes wanted to be low, certain pairings demanded a break between them and certain ones forbade it, and that the wanting was as plain to him as the difference between Uncle Vernon's angry tread and his merely tired one. The work was turning the wanting into rules a goblin could see. He would sing a phrase the way it wanted to go, and a keeper named Doruk, who had the best hand, would draw what the air did where the cold gathered, where the light lined, and another keeper, old Vexa, who had spent 200 years cataloguing and disagreed with everyone on principle, would cross-check it against the meaning they already knew, and slowly, phrase by phrase, a pattern stood up out of the noise. The marks, it turned out, were not one writing but two laid over each other. There was the word layer, which the goblins had read perfectly for 3 centuries. This mark means iron, this mark means hold, this mark means the enemy's hand. And there was the breath layer, which they had looked straight through, because it was not made of separate marks at all, but of how the marks were set, their height, their weight, their spacing, the small slashes and doublings that the keepers had catalogued faithfully as ornament. The breath layer told the throat what to do. And the breath layer, Harry came to understand over those gray months, was not arbitrary. It was an argument. A canto was not a list of magic words. It was a single sustained sentence that had to be true the whole way through, and the breath marks were the logic of the truth, where you laid the stress because that was the load-bearing claim, where you broke because the claim turned, where you bent the note down because you were yielding a point in order to win a larger one. It's like a proof, Harry said one afternoon, and then had to explain what a proof was because the goblins reckoned in gold and contract and had their own deep mathematics but had never sat through a school lesson on geometry. Mrs. Cole made us do them. You start with something true and you only allow yourself steps that keep it true, and if you do it right then the thing at the end has to be true. It can't help being true because every step held. He tapped the tablet. That's what a canto is. The first mark is something you know is true. Every mark after it has to follow or it breaks. And the last mark is what you wanted to make happen, except it doesn't just say it, it makes it, because you've sung a thing that can't help being true and the world has to catch up. He frowned at his own words. They had come out larger than he meant. That's why you have to mean it. You can't fake a step in a proof. The whole thing falls down. You can't fake a step in a canto either. The iron knows. Vexa, who disagreed with everyone on principle, did not disagree. She sat very still, 200 years old, and then she said to Nagnok, not to the boy, "We taught it as poetry. We taught the young keepers it was poetry, that the songs were beautiful and sad and lost. It is not poetry, it is law. We have been mourning it like a dead language, and it is a dead jurisprudence." She looked at Harry with something that in a goblin passed for fury and was actually grief. 900 years we have been the people who understand contracts better than any race alive, and the greatest contract our ancestors ever wrote we filed under song and wept over it and never once read it as what it was. She stood and gathered her robes, and at the door she stopped. "Teach him fast," she said to Nagnok, "before the rest of us die of being ashamed." The danger announced itself in the 11th week, and Harry never forgot it because it was the first time the work nearly killed him. The tablet was a short one. The catalog named it The Quenching, a smith's song to draw the heat out of new-forged metal faster than water could, and it looked simple, 40 marks, and Harry was tired, and tiredness is where the world keeps its teeth. He found the first note and sang, and somewhere in the middle of the third phrase he let a stressed mark fall a half-beat early, not from not knowing but from fatigue, his breath running ahead of his attention the way it does at the end of a long day, and the proof broke. He felt it break. It was not like forgetting a word, it was like missing a stair in the dark. The canto, which had been gathering cold into the iron, gathered it instead into him. The heat went out of his own hands. They went white, then blue, then past blue into a gray he had no name for, and the cold ran up his arms toward his chest the way it should have run into the metal, and he could not stop singing, because a half-sung canto is a falling thing, and the only ways out are up or down, and he had no breath left to take it up. Nagnok took it down for him. The old goblin's hand closed over Harry's mouth, not gently, hard, cutting the note off mid-breath, and at the same instant Vexa swept the tablet off the table and into a lead-lined box and slammed the lid, and the broken canto, deprived of both its singer and its text, collapsed, and the cold sucked back out of Harry all at once, which was worse than the cold going in, a wrenching backward rush that put him on the floor. He lay on the cold stone with his gray hands curled against his chest, and the keepers stood over him, and for a long moment no one said anything, and then Harry, 8 years old, on the floor with the feeling coming back into his fingers and 1,000 burning needles, said the only thing he could think of, which was, "I let the third phrase fall early. I knew better. I was tired and I let it fall early." "Yes," said Vexa from above him. "You did. It won't happen again," Harry said. "It will," said Vexa, and squatted down beside him with a creak of 200 years, and her flat black eyes were not unkind, which from Vexa was nearly tenderness. "It will happen again because you are a child, and children tire, and the songs do not care that you are a child. So here is the lesson, and you will learn it now on the floor where lessons stay learned. You do not sing tired, you do not sing to prove you can. You do not sing the next phrase because you are ashamed to stop in the middle of the first. The song is not your friend. The song is a true thing, and a true thing does not love you, and it will take the cold from wherever it can reach, and the nearest warm thing in the room is always you." She straightened. "We lost the singing for 300 years and we forgot many things, but we did not forget this because it is written in the margin of every keeper's catalog in words of warning. The singer is the first thing the song will spend. Remember it and you will grow old. Forget it." She nodded at his gray hands. "And you will not." Harry remembered it. He remembered it for the rest of his life. And from that day he sang differently, slower, with a margin, never to the limit of his breath, but always with a coin held back, the way Vexa held back her agreement, the way Gornuk held back his hands on the empty iron table. And the keepers watching understood that the boy had learned in one afternoon on the floor what some young keepers of the old days had taken years and a missing finger to learn, and they revised quietly upward their estimate of how dangerous he was going to be. The grammar grew. Harry filled waxboard after waxboard, and the keepers copied the boards onto iron, because wax was for things you might be wrong about, and they were, increasingly, not wrong. By the turning of the year they had a working grammar of perhaps a third of the breath layer, enough to attempt, with care, the shorter true cantos, the ones the catalogue marked minor, which the old wars had used not for the great workings but for the small constant business of soldiering. A song to keep an edge keen, a song to find true north under stone, a song to make a man's voice carry a mile. Harry sang them and they worked, and each one that worked was a thing no goblin had done in 300 years, and the keepers stopped treating it as a miracle and started treating it as a craft, which Harry preferred, because miracles made people kneel and craft made them think. Above the ground the matter did not stay quiet, because matters like this never do. It reached Albus Dumbledore in the way most things reached him, which was sideways and late, and from a direction he had not been watching. He had built his life on watching certain directions, the boy who lived in his Surrey exile, the slow stirrings of old enemies, the long patient architecture by which a frightened world might be kept from frightening itself to death. He had not been watching Gringotts because Gringotts had been, for 300 years, the most reliable thing in the wizarding world. It counted, it kept, it did not change. And so when his instruments told him, by a flicker, a wrongness, a name appearing in the wrong ledger, that the Potter vault had been accessed 11 times in a single season by no Potter, that a child answering Harry's description had been seen entering the bank and not the alley, that the goblins, the unchanging goblins, had begun very quietly to change. He felt the particular cold that a careful man feels when he discovers that a board he had nailed down years ago has come loose without a sound. He did not go himself. To go himself would be to declare that it mattered, and a careful man does not declare. Sent a letter on the heavy cream paper of his office, addressed with exquisite courtesy to the director of Gringotts, requesting, as a matter of the ordinary guardianship he held over the Potter estate, a brief accounting of the recent activity upon it, and trusting that all was in order and remaining their faithful servant. And see, the letter was received by Gornuk, who read it 3 times and then summoned Nagnok and laid it on the empty iron table between them. He has noticed, Gornuk said. The old wizard, he holds the boy's guardianship on paper, and he has noticed that we have the boy, and he is asking very politely, which is how that one asks for things he intends to have, what we are doing with the Potter estate. His amber eyes were flat. He does not know about the songs. He would not be this calm. He thinks we are doing something with the gold, a guardian's natural fear. He tapped the letter once, which is a gift, Nagnok, if we are quick. We will answer him about the gold. We will answer him so completely, so transparently, with such a wealth of dull and accurate detail about the boy's inheritance and our scrupulous management of it, that the answer fills his whole field of view and leaves no room for the question he did not know to ask. We will bury the song in the gold. A thin, cold smile. It is, after all, what we have always done. And the boy, Nagnok asked. If the old wizard comes for the boy as guardian, with the law of the wizards behind him, what do we set against that? The thing we should have set down weeks ago, Gornuk said, and have been too cautious to bind, because binding it makes it real and makes us responsible for it forever. The provisional contract is a courtesy. A courtesy can be argued away by a clever enough wizard with a clever enough claim of guardianship. He drew a fresh sheet of iron leaf toward him, the kind the goblins used for the contracts that mattered. We will make it more than a courtesy. We will make him in the old law a ward of the nation, not a guest, not an asset, a ward, with the standing the old law gives to one the nation has taken under its iron. The wizard's guardianship is paper. Ward standing is older than their paper, and we never signed it away, because it never occurred to them that we would dare use it. He began in the close goblin hand to write, "Let Dumbledore come if he comes. He will find that to take the boy he must first take him from us, and to take a ward from the nation he must break a bond as old as their treaty, and the breaking of that bond is, by the terms they themselves wrote, an act of war." He did not look up. He is too careful a man to go to war over a guardianship. We are counting on his caution. It is the most reliable thing about him. So the contract was made, and Harry, who was 8 now and had grown an inch and had stopped flinching when an adult moved quickly near him, which Nagnok had noticed and said nothing about, stood again before the wandless council and put his hand on the iron leaf. And Nagnok stood sponsor, and the old words were said, and Harry felt the thing close around him that he had felt close around the cantos. A sentence made true, a step in a proof that could not be faked. When it was done he was, in a law older than the one that ruled the world above, a child of the goblin nation, and the cold iron key in his pocket was no longer a guest's key but his own. Coinwright Bargrim let the contract pass, and then moved against it the only way a careful loser moves, which is not against the boy but against the ground the boy stood on. He did not stand up in council and rage. He had learned in the first session that raging only made the wet-eyed sentimentalists love the child more. Instead, over that winter, he went quietly among the houses of the nation and spoke to the ones who counted gold and feared its loss, which was a great many of them, and he did not say the child must go. He said only, who pays for this? The deep was being worked as it had not been worked in 3 centuries. Keepers were being pulled from the ledgers to copy grammar onto iron. Healers were standing by, idle and expensive, against the day the human child sang himself onto the floor again. Every hour of it was an hour not spent on the gold that kept the roof over the nation, and to what end? A buckler, a song that made a voice carry. Wonders, yes. But you cannot eat a wonder, and you cannot pay a wizard's tax with a voice that carries a mile, and the wizards, when they learned, and Bargrim said when, never if would not be charmed by wonders, they would be frightened, and frightened wizards reached for fire. It was a good argument because it was a true one, and Harry, who heard of it through Nagnok, respected it the way he had learned to respect any true thing aimed at him. The motion Bargrim brought to council was modest, which was its cleverness. He did not move to expel the boy. He moved only that the work of the deep be put under the oversight of a committee of the gold houses, to ensure, he said reasonably, that the nation's resources were not being spent faster than the nation could bear. A committee, an accounting, the most goblin thing in the world. And whoever controlled the accounting of the work would, in time, control the work, because a thing that must justify its every hour to those who fear it is a thing already half-stopped. Gornuk saw it coming the way he saw everything coming, and he did not fight the motion. He amended it. He rose at the empty iron table and said that Bargrim was entirely correct, that the work must answer for its cost, that no enterprise of the nation should be exempt from the accounting, and that therefore the work of the deep would be entered in the books like any venture, with its costs set down in one column and its returns in the other, and reviewed each quarter by the full council, Bargrim's house included. And that the first return to be entered against the season's costs would be the buckler, the first new wardiron in 300 years, at the value the nation would assign to a thing no wizard alive could make and no enemy could pierce. And would the honored Coinwright care to name that value for the books, since he was so concerned with the books? Bargrim, who was no fool, did not name it, because to name it low was to call the wonder worthless in front of a council that had wept over it, and to name it high was to enter, in the nation's own ledger in his own column, proof that the boy was the most profitable venture the deep had seen in 3 centuries. He said only that the value was not yet established, and Gornuk agreed gravely that it was not, and that the books would establish it in due course, quarter by quarter, as the returns came in and the motion passed, amended, and Bargrim had his committee. And Gornuk had turned the committee into a machine for proving, 4 times a year, in the only language the gold houses respected, that Harry Potter paid for himself many times over. It was, Nagnok told Harry afterward, the most thorough defeat he had ever watched one goblin hand another while appearing to grant his every word, and Bargrim knew it and sat down, and began immediately to plan the next one, because that was the only thing a goblin of his house knew how to do with a defeat. He did not tell the Dursleys any of it. They did not ask. Black Car came and went, and Aunt Petunia had stopped watching from the window, and Dudley had stopped pressing his face to the glass, and the cupboard under the stairs had become, by some unspoken adjustment, a place Harry slept on the nights he was home and not a place he was sent, and that was the whole of the change above the ground, and it was enough, because Harry's real life had moved underground, where the iron knew his name. But there was another who had noticed, and he was neither careful nor far away. Aurelius Greaves had spent 40 years learning that the world tells you things if you arrange to be listening when it does. The gray bar on his shelf had rung once and gone silent, and a lesser hunter would have waited for it to ring again. Greaves did not wait. A bar that had been dead for 30 years and then rang for the length of a held breath had been answered by something, somewhere, and the something was a true canto sung true, and there were only so many places in the world that held enough goblin iron to make a dead bar in Bloomsbury sing in sympathy. He made a list. The list had 4 entries. 3 of them he eliminated in a fortnight, by methods he did not write on cards. The 4th was Gringotts, and Gringotts could not be eliminated because Gringotts could not be entered, and a thing you cannot enter you must approach from the edges. He approached from the edges. He spent the winter buying. He bought through agents and through agents of agents, so that no single seller could say that Aurelius Greaves was assembling anything at all. He bought every scrap of posterizing goblin metalwork that came onto the quiet market, the looted pieces, the grave-robbed pieces, the bits of war iron that had drifted into private collections over 3 centuries and sat there dead and decorative, and he brought them home to the tall, thin house and laid them on a long table and waited each night to see which of them stirred. Most did not. Dead iron is dead. But now and then a piece would shiver faintly late in the evening, all of them at the same hour, as though somewhere a tuning fork had been struck and these poor cousins felt it in their bones, and Greaves marked the hour, and over the weeks the hours made a pattern, and the pattern was a schedule, and the schedule was the working day of someone who sang true cantos in a fixed place, with Saturdays heaviest, tapering through the week. A creature of habit, Greaves said to the humming room, pleased. And young, I think. The strong days are the days a child is free from school. He had not expected a child. It rearranged certain plans and simplified others. A child could be frightened or bought, or its guardians could be. A child had not yet learned the thousand small refusals an adult uses to keep itself whole. He pinned a new card beside the first. It read, "A child bound to Gringotts sings on a schedule," and beneath that they are keeping him, which means they know what he is worth. There was one more thing he needed before he moved, and it was the thing that made the difference between a hunter and a fool. He needed to know what the songs could do so that he would know what he was buying and what it would cost to take it. For that he needed a true cantos working, observed at close range, and for that he needed an artifact that would sing when the child sang, and held in a place where Greaves could watch it do so. There was such an artifact. He had not bought it because the man who owned it would not sell. His name was Tobias Pell, a minor collector in Norwich, harmless, sentimental, the keeper of a single goblin warhorn that had been in his family since the rising, and that Pell loved the way some men love a dog. Greaves had offered for it 3 times over the years and been refused 3 times kindly, and had let the matter rest because the horn was dead, and a dead horn was worth no quarrel. The horn was not dead any longer. On the nights the child sang, Greaves's lesser pieces shivered. He had no doubt that Tobias Pell's war horn, a true and whole instrument, did far more than shiver. It would be singing in its case in a sentimental man's parlor in Norwich, ringing out the schedule of a goblin-warded child, and Tobias Pell, who loved it, would surely have noticed, and would surely, being sentimental and harmless and proud, be telling people. Greaves went to Norwich on a Tuesday, which was a light day on the schedule, so that the horn would be quiet and Pell off his guard. What was found 3 days later by a niece who had grown worried at the unanswered telephone was a house undisturbed in every particular but one. Nothing was taken that a thief would take. The silver was in the drawer, the money in the desk. Tobias Pell sat in his armchair by the cold grate as though he had fallen asleep there, and the doctors would in time decide, because they could find nothing else to decide, that his heart had simply stopped, as the hearts of sentimental men of a certain age sometimes do. Only the niece who had visited as a child would ever remark that the glass case in the corner of the parlor, the case her uncle had shown her so proudly, the case that had held the old curved horn he would never sell. Only she would notice that the case was empty, and that no one seemed able to tell her what it had ever held, and that when she pressed the matter the family grew uncomfortable and changed the subject, until in time she came to wonder whether she had imagined the horn entirely, and let it go. Because that is what the living do with the small unexplained absences the patient leave behind them. Underground, Harry felt none of this then. He would learn of it later, and would not forgive himself the not knowing, though it was not his to forgive. On the Tuesday that Tobias Pell's heart stopped, Harry was bent over the largest tablet they had yet let him attempt, a true minor canto the catalogue named the Ward of the Standing Iron, a soldier's song, the song you sang over your own armor before a battle so that it would turn the first blow that would otherwise have killed you. It was 60 marks. It was the longest thing he had tried, and the keepers had argued for a week about whether to let him, and Nagnok had ended the argument by saying that the boy would attempt it eventually whether they permitted it or not, and it had better be here, with the nation's healers a stair away, than alone. Harry read it through and through again. He had grown careful in a way the cupboard had never taught him. The cupboard had taught him to be careful of people, and the deep was teaching him to be careful of truth, which was a harder and cleaner discipline. He found the place where the canto's argument turned, 2/3 through, a long descending phrase where you yielded, where the song admitted that no iron is proof against everything, that the blow will come, that you cannot sing yourself untouchable. And then, on the strength of that admission, on the strength of having told the truth about your own death, gathered and rose into the claim that mattered. Not that the blow would not land, but that this iron, having been told the truth, would stand. He understood, reading it, that the goblins who had written it had been wiser about war than the wizards he had read about in the bank's small library, who sought spells to make themselves untouchable and were always, in the end, touched. The war song did not promise safety, it promised standing. It was the difference, he thought, between a wall that claims it cannot fall and a wall that knows it can and decides to hold anyway. He sang it slowly with a coin held back, the way Vexa had taught him on the floor. It took everything he was willing to spend, which was not everything he had, because he had learned. The yielding phrase nearly broke him. To sing your own death true at 8 years old and mean it and then refuse it was a thing that left him gray and shaking, but he held every step and kept his margin, and the proof did not fall down. And on the 60th mark the cold rolled out across the cataloging room, and the air in front of him hardened into a sheet of pale light that hung for a moment like a frozen shield, and then sank into the iron buckler the keepers had set on the table for the working, and the buckler, which had been ordinary dark metal, was ordinary dark metal no longer. It rang when Nagnok struck it with the flat of a blade, a clear high sustained note, and the blade, good goblin steel, keen enough to part a falling hair, left no mark on it at all. Doruk struck it harder. Vexa, who disagreed with everyone, took the blade herself and struck it with 2 hands and all 200 years of her strength, and the buckler rang and stood and bore not a scratch, and Vexa set down the blade and looked at the boy and said nothing at all, which from Vexa was the highest praise the nation could give. "You have sung the ward of the standing iron," Nagnok said. His voice was not steady. "There are 17 pieces in the upper hall, war shields of the old wars, that we have kept 300 years and could never wake, because the songs that made them were sung over them once and have to be sung again to renew, and we lost the singing, and one by one as the centuries passed they have gone dull and become only metal. You have just made a new one, the first new ward iron in the world since the songs went out." He picked up the buckler and turned it in the cold light, and Harry saw that the old goblin's hands were not steady either. "We could armor a guard with this, we could armor 100, we could—" He stopped himself and set the buckler down, and the keeper's caution came back into his face. "We will not yet. 1 shield is a wonder, 100 shields is an army, and an army is a thing the world notices, and we are not ready to be noticed." He looked at Harry. "But you should know what you have done. You have not learned a song today, you have ended a famine. Do you understand? For 300 years my people have been hungry for this and have told themselves they were not, the way the very poor learn to say they are not hungry. And you have set bread on the table. They will not forget it. Whatever Bargrim says, and he will say a great deal, they will not forget who set bread on the table." Harry looked at the buckler, the first new ward iron in 300 years, ringing faintly to itself on the table, and he was too tired and too gray and too 8 years old to feel the size of it. He felt instead the thing he always felt when he finished a canto and the room went quiet around him, a small, fierce, private gladness that he had been right, and that being right had for once made something rather than broken something. And then underneath the gladness, underneath the ringing of the buckler and the murmur of the keepers, he felt the other thing, the thing he had felt on the first night and had been made to promise to leave alone. The deep song stirred. It was nearer now. That was what frightened him, lying awake that night in the room with the door that locked from his side. Not that he had heard it, but that he had heard it more clearly than before, and that it had not, this time, sunk back down at once. The ward of the standing iron was a true canto sung true, and every true canto sung true was, he had come to understand, a word spoken in a language the deep thing knew, and the deep thing was listening, and it was listening harder. After the buckler rang, the low note had risen from the foundation of the world, and it held, and held longer than ever before, and somewhere in the holding Harry had felt, distinctly, the way you feel a person in a dark room turn their face toward you, the deep thing locate him. Not the deep, not the songs, him, the singer. It had found, in 300 years of silence, a voice it could hear, and it had marked where the voice was, and Harry understood, lying in the dark with the cold iron key cold in his hand, that the deep song was no longer singing in its sleep. It was singing to him. He did not tell Nagnok that night. He told himself he would, and he meant to, and in the morning the keepers were full of the buckler and the grammar and the next tablet, and the moment did not come, and he let it not come, because he was 8 and the deep song was patient and the work was bread on the table, and he did not want to be the one who said that the bread had a price. He would tell. He promised himself he would tell when he understood it better, when he had a name for what the deep thing was, when he could bring Nagnok not a child's fear but a thing the keepers could weigh and act on. He told himself a great many sensible things, lying in the dark, and underneath all of them the deep song held its note, and waited, the way it had waited for everything, the way it would wait for him. Far to the north, in a circular office at the top of a tower, an old wizard read a very long and very dull and very complete accounting of the management of the Potter estate, and found, as careful men do, exactly what he had asked for and nothing else, and set it aside, half reassured and half not, and resolved to keep one more direction under his watch than he had been watching before. And in a tall, thin house in Bloomsbury, a man who was officially nothing lifted a long, curved war horn from a velvet case, the only thing he had taken from a sentimental house in Norwich, and held it up to the lamp and watched it ring of its own accord, ring on the schedule of a goblin-warded child, ring out the working day of the most valuable thing Aurelius Greaves had found in 40 years of patient hunting, and he smiled his closed ledger smile and began at last to plan how to take it. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. Named Battle Friend, the warrior they sent to guard him did not want the work, and said so, which Harry liked. He was called Carrock, and he was young by the reckoning of goblins, which made him about 60, and he wore the iron of the nation's guard, not the bankers' dark suits, but a coat of overlapping plates that moved like cloth and rang faintly when he walked. And on the first morning he was assigned to stand at the door of the cataloguing room, he looked at the human child bent over a war tablet and did not bow, did not soften. did not do any of the things the keepers had begun to do around Harry, and instead said flatly to Nagnok, "I am a soldier. You have made me a nursemaid. Tell the council I have noted my objection." "Noted," said Nagnok, unbothered, and left. Harry looked up from the tablet. He was 10 now, and the years underground had done something to him that the years above never had. He had filled out a little, stood straighter, and the watchfulness that had once been a small animal's flinching had become something cooler and more deliberate, the watchfulness of a person who has decided that the world is worth reading closely. He looked at Carrock for a moment, reading him, and then went back to the marks. "You think it's a waste of a soldier," Harry said, not as a question. "Ending at a door for a child. I think," said Carrock, "that the nation has gone soft over a singing boy, and that wonders are not weapons, and that when the trouble comes, and you have made trouble, child, whether you know it or not, it will not be turned aside by a buckler that rings prettily. It will be turned aside by soldiers, and the nation is short of soldiers and long on sentiment, and I have been taken off the wall to mind you, and I would rather be on the wall." He folded his arms. "You asked. I have answered. I will guard you well because I keep my oaths, and I will resent it the whole time because I am honest. You will find I am not difficult to read." "No," Harry agreed, "you're not." He turned a page of the grammar. "Most people aren't. You're just one of the few who doesn't mind." He found his next mark. "I'll make you a deal. You guard the door, and I'll try to make it worth a soldier's time, and when the trouble comes, because you're right, it's coming, I'll make sure you're standing somewhere it can be fought instead of somewhere it can't. That's the most I can promise. I'm not going to tell you wonders are weapons. You'll see for yourself, or you won't." Carrock looked at the child for a long moment. Then he grunted, which Harry would come to learn was the warmest sound in his vocabulary, and took up his post, and that was the beginning of the second friendship of Harry's life, though neither of them would have called it that for a long time, and Carrock would have denied it under oath, and the oath would have failed because the iron knows. The work that winter turned a corner, and the corner had a name, and the name changed everything. For 3 years Harry had been singing the songs that survived, finishing the cantos the keepers had kept, waking the iron the nation had embalmed. It was restoration, and it was a wonder, and Bargram's quarterly committee entered it in the books at values that climbed each season until even the gold houses had gone quiet. But it was, Harry came to feel, still only reading. He read the language now better than he sang it. The grammar in his head had grown past the third of the breath layer they had charted, past the half, until he could look at a canto he had never seen and hear before he sang a note where its argument would turn and where it would try to spend him. And one gray afternoon, with Carrock at the door and Vexa across the table and a tablet between them that the catalogue marked broken, a war song that survived in 3 copies, none complete, each breaking off at a different place, so that no keeper in 3 centuries had been able even to guess at the whole, Harry did the thing that turned the corner. He finished it himself, not from a copy. There was no complete copy. He read the 3 broken versions, and he heard underneath the gaps the shape the argument wanted to take, the way you hear the rest of a sentence a stammering person is trying to say. And he took up a stylus, and on a fresh sheet of iron leaf he wrote the missing marks, wrote them in the war tongue, in the breath layer and the word layer both, completing the proof the old singers had begun and the centuries had broken, and then he sang what he had written, and it worked. It was a small canto when it was whole, a song to silence a single footfall, a scout's song, the song you sang over your own boots to cross a stone floor without a sound. When Harry finished it, the keeper's ears told them he had stopped singing, but their eyes told them his mouth still moved, and Carrock at the door drew his blade before he understood why, because every instinct of a soldier had just screamed that something dangerous had entered the room without a sound, and the something was a 10-year-old boy walking across the flagstones in shoes that made no noise at all, none, a silence so complete it had weight. Vexa rose from her chair. 200 years old, and her hands were shaking, and she did not care who saw. "You wrote it," she said. "There is no complete copy. There has never been a complete copy. You did not finish a song we kept. You finished a song that was lost, truly lost, not embalmed, gone, and you finished it in the tongue, in our tongue, correctly, because it works. The boy is walking, and I cannot hear him." She turned to Nagnok, who had come to the doorway behind Carrock, and her voice cracked. "Keeper. He is not reading the language any longer. He is writing it. Do you understand what that means? It means the songs are not finite. It means the nation is not merely recovering what it lost. It means," and here she said the thing that none of them had let themselves think in 300 years, "it means we could make new ones." The silence in the cataloging room was the silence of the deep itself. Nagnok crossed to the boy slowly and looked down at the sheet of iron leaf with the new marks on it. The first new true canto written by any hand in 3 centuries, written by a human child of 10 in a tongue his own people had forgotten, and the old keeper did a thing Harry had never seen him do. He reached out and very carefully with one finger touched the marks, the way a man touches a thing he has dreamed of so long he must check that it is real. "I have to take this to Gornuk," he said. "And Gornuk will have to take it to the whole nation, because this," he lifted the leaf, "this is not a thing a council can keep quiet or enter in a column or manage. This is the thing my people stopped praying for because the prayer hurt too much to say. The singing is not just back, Harry, it is alive. It can grow. We are not the keepers of a tomb after all. We are again a people who can sing. His black eyes were streaming, and he did not wipe them. There is a thing the old law lets the nation do, once or twice in an age, for one who gives it back its life. I did not think to see it done in my keeping. I am very glad to be wrong. Harry, 10 years old, in shoes that made no sound, did not yet know what the thing was. He would learn within the week. The nation moved slowly in most matters and with terrifying speed in the few that touched its soul, and this touched its soul. And so within 7 days the word had gone out through every hall and vault and forge of the goblin nation, down passages no wizard had ever walked, to settlements under mountains Harry had never heard named, and on the 8th day he was brought for the first time all the way down, not to the annel deep, below it. They went on foot because the old law required that one approach the deep places on one's own feet. And they went for hours, Nagnok ahead with a lamp and Carrock behind with a blade and Harry between them. Down stairs and down ramps and down a long spiral cut through rock that grew warm, then hot, then warm again, until the air smelled of iron and old fire and the walls were no longer carved but cast poured, as though the mountain itself had once been molten and some hand had shaped it before it cooled. And at the bottom they came out into a hall that made the annel deep seem a closet. Harry stopped on the threshold and could not speak. It was the first forge. He knew it without being told. The way he had known the museum was larger than the school. It was vast past the holding of the eye, a cavern that went up into a dark no lamp could find and down into a glow no eye could bear. And ranged across its floor and up its walls stood the goblin nation, not 30 in a council chamber but thousands, tens of thousands, rank on rank rising into the dark, every goblin who could come and many who by rights could not, gathered in a silence so total and so charged that the air itself seemed to ring with it. And in the center of the hall, on a floor of black iron worn smooth by feet that had stood there 900 years ago, a single fire burned in a basin of stone white-hot, throwing no smoke, and beside it stood Gornuk, head of the wandless council, in iron Harry had never seen him wear. Nagnok stopped Harry at the edge of the iron floor with a hand on his shoulder. From here, he said very low, you go alone. It is the law. Walk to the fire. Do not be afraid of the size of it. They have not come to judge you, they have come to thank you, which is a thing my people are very bad at and have not had occasion to do in 3 centuries, and so they have come in their thousands to be sure of doing it right. His hand tightened once, then lifted. Go, battle friend, go and let them name you. Harry walked out onto the iron floor alone, 10 years old, and the whole nation watched him come. He did not hurry and he did not falter, and he did not look up at the ranked thousands rising into the dark, because he had learned long ago that the way to cross a room full of watching eyes was to choose a single point and walk to it. And so he walked to the fire and to Gornuk, and the only sound in all that enormous space was the small sound of his footsteps on the worn iron, and even that halfway across he silenced without deciding to, the scout's song he had written rising in him unbidden. So that he crossed the second half of the first forge in a silence as complete as the nation's own, and a sound went through the watching thousands then, a low sound, an indrawn breath multiplied past counting, because they had all heard the boy go quiet, and they understood that the silence was the new song, the lost and found thing, walking toward them on a child's feet. He stopped before the fire. Gornuk looked at him across the white flame, the amber eyes lit gold. Harry Potter, Gornuk said, and though he did not raise his voice it carried to the highest rank in the dark, because they had hung a true canto in the air of that hall to carry it, a voice song, one of the first Harry had ever woken. You came to us a child in borrowed shoes, and we did not know what you were, and I told you so, and I am glad now that I told you the truth, because it lets me tell you this truth too, and you will know I do not flatter. You have given the nation back its voice, not a song. Not a wonder for a column in a book, its voice. The thing that made us a people before we were bankers, before we were beaten, before the treaty and the gallows and the 300 silent years, you have given it back, and more than given it back, you have given it life, for you do not only sing what was lost, you make anew, and a people who can make anew cannot be silenced, not by any treaty, not by any patience, not ever again. He paused, and the fire threw its light up into the watching dark. There is a name the old law lets the nation give, when one knot of our blood has done a thing the nation cannot repay. It has been given 4 times in 900 years. It will not be given lightly now or soon again. It binds the one who bears it to the nation, and the nation to the one who bears it, blade to blade, in a bond that death does not end and law cannot dissolve, for it is older than law. Do you understand what is offered, Harry Potter? You need not take it. No one has ever refused it, but you may be the first, and the nation will think no less of you, for a gift refused with honor is still a gift given. Harry looked at the fire, and at Gornuk, and past Gornuk at the ranked thousands of the oldest people he had ever known, and he thought, because he always thought, even now, even here, about what it meant, the binding, the blade to blade, the bond that death did not end. He was 10. He understood that he was being offered a thing that would shape the whole of his life, and that he did not fully know its weight, and that this was precisely the moment the cupboard had taught him to be most careful, to give nothing away, to refuse the first person who asked twice. And he understood, too, standing on the worn iron with the whole nation holding its breath, that the cupboard had been wrong about one thing, the only thing, and that he had spent 3 years learning it. That there are bonds you walk into with open eyes not because you are certain, but because the people offering them have shown you over years, in cold stone and old danger and a door that locked from your side, that they meant it. The goblins had never once lied to him. Bargrim had told him the truth even when the truth was aimed at his removal. Vexa had taught him on the floor. Nagnok had crossed a museum for him and kept his word in a garden full of roses. The nation had offered him a roof and never taken it back. I understand, Harry said, and his voice, though he did not have a carrying canto on it, reached the high dark because the hall was silent enough to let it. It's a thing you can't take back, blade to blade, for always. He looked up then for the first time at the watching thousands, and he was not afraid of the size of it, because Nagnok had told him not to be, and Nagnok had never lied. I've spent my whole life being given things people could take back, or pretending to. I know the difference now, so yes, if you'll have me, yes, I'll take a thing that can't be taken back. I've wanted one my whole life, and I didn't know what it was called. For a moment the first forge was utterly still. Then Gornuk drew from a sheath at his side a blade, not a goblin blade of the new making, but an ancient thing, dark, its surface carved base to point with the close angular marks. A sword that was itself a canto, the longest single working Harry had ever seen written. And he laid it flat across both his palms and held it out across the white fire. And he said in the war tongue words that Harry, who knew the tongue now better than any living goblin, understood as they were spoken, and which meant, "Here is the nation's iron, lay your hand on it and be named." Harry laid his hand on the blade, the marks lit under his palm. They did not wait for him to sing. The sword sang itself, woken by 3 years of true cantos and by the hand of the one who had woken them. And the working ran up the dark steel in cold blue fire and leapt from the blade into Harry's hand and up his arm and into his chest, where it met the bell's note he had carried since he was 7, the note that had never left him, and the two sounds locked together the way his voice and the museum bell had locked and became one. And the cold rolled out across the first forge in a wave that should have made 100,000 goblins flinch, and instead made not one of them move, because they had waited 300 years to feel it, and they would not have flinched from it for the world. And the white fire in its basin of stone flared and changed, the white going through gold and into a blue that was the exact blue of the canto fire, the forge flame answering the working, the deepest, oldest fire of the nation recognizing the thing that had come back to it, and in that blue light, before the eyes of the whole gathered nation, Harry Potter was named. The name they gave him was in the war tongue, and it was Durmahal, and it meant, as nearly as the wizard tongue could hold it, battle friend, the one whom the nation will go to war beside, and for the friend proven not in peace but in the place where friendship costs everything, the comrade of the blade. And when Gornuk spoke it, the whole nation spoke it back, 100,000 voices in the dark, not shouting. The goblins did not shout, but speaking it together low and even and absolutely certain, so that the name came up out of the dark like the deep song itself. And Harry felt it settle onto him and into him and become, in the old law, in the iron, in the bond that death did not end, simply true. He was crying. He had not decided to. He was 10 years old, and 100,000 of the oldest people in the world had just told him, in a voice like the foundation of the earth, that he was theirs and they were his, and no one had ever told him anything like it. And he stood on the worn iron with his hand on the singing blade and the blue fire fading, and he wept, and the nation let him, because the nation that day was weeping too. Far down, far below even the first forge, in the dark beneath the foundation, where the deep song lived, something heard 100,000 voices speak a name in the war tongue, and stirred and listened and learned the name and held it the way it held everything against the day it would have use for it. The trouble, when it came, did not come down into the dark, because the dark could not be entered. It came for Harry above the ground, where he was only a boy. It was late summer, and Harry was 11 now, and on the rare days he was at Privet Drive fewer and fewer, but the law in the wards required that the Potter child keep some residence in the wizarding world's reckoning, and so he kept the cupboard, or rather kept the small bedroom that had become his when Dudley's hoard outgrew it. A change Harry had effected one afternoon with a single quiet sentence to Uncle Vernon about the gold and the little men and the neighbors. After which no one had troubled him about rooms again. On those rare days he sometimes walked into the village, alone, because Carrock could not follow him above the ground without causing the precise sort of notice the nation wished to avoid, and a boy walking to the shop was beneath the world's attention. He was not beneath the attention of Aurelius Greaves. The man was sitting on the bench by the war memorial when Harry came up the lane, and Harry knew him before he knew how he knew him by the stillness, the closed ledger stillness, the stillness of a person who has been waiting a long time and is good at it. He was well dressed and entirely ordinary and entirely wrong, the way a single false note in a true canto is wrong, and Harry's whole trained ear came up at the sight of him, the way Carrock's hand had come up at the silenced footstep. He did not run, running told a hunter where the warm thing was. He walked at the same pace, and the man watched him come with mild gray eyes, and when Harry was near enough, the man said pleasantly, "Hello, Harry, will you sit a moment? I have come a long way to talk to you, and I would rather do it on a bench in the sun than any of the other ways it could be done." Harry sat at the far end of the bench where he could see the man's hands. "You know my name," he said. "You're not from the village. You've been waiting here, and you knew I'd come this way, which means you've watched me before." He read the man as he spoke, the way he read everything, the good plain coat, the hands that did not fidget, the small gray eyes that took in Harry's reading of him and were pleased by it rather than troubled. "And you knew I'd sit down instead of running, which means you know what I am, or you think you do. You're the one who's been buying the iron." Something moved in the gray eyes, not surprise. Greaves did not show surprise, but a sharpening, the pleasure of a connoisseur who has bought a thing sight unseen and found it finer than the description. "There," he said softly. "I had hoped. The report said you were quick. Reports always say that. It is the cheapest praise. But you are quick, yes, Harry. I am the one who has been buying the iron. My name is Aurelius Greaves, and I have spent 40 years collecting the things the world has forgot how to use. And 3 years ago a dead bar of goblin metal on my shelf began to ring, and I have spent those 3 years finding out why, and the why is you." He folded his hands. "I am going to be honest with you because you will see through anything else, and dishonesty wastes the time of clever people. I want what you can do, not to harm you, to learn from you. I am old, and I have given my whole life to these silent things, and I have never once made one of them speak, and you, a child, walk among them and they sing. Do you understand what that is to a man like me? You are the answer to the only question I have ever asked. I would give a very great deal to sit at your side and learn even the smallest part of what your ear already knows." "You killed Tobias Pell," Harry said. He did not know that he knew it until he said it. But he had learned that year of the death in Norwich, Nagnok had told him gravely, when the nation's agents traced the missing warhorn to the quiet market, and the quiet market to a buyer who left no name, and he had carried it since, the not knowing he could not forgive. And now on the bench in the sun, reading the man's still hands, he heard it the way he heard a false note. The horn, the schedule, the patient buyer, the sentimental man whose heart simply stopped. The proof completed itself, and he could not unsing it. Greaves did not deny it. That was the worst thing about him, Harry would think later. He did not deny it, and he did not boast of it, and he did not apologize. He simply allowed it, the way you allow a true mark in a canto, because to deny a true thing in front of one who can hear truth is to break your own argument. Tobias Pell, Greaves said, owned a thing he did not understand, that had begun to do something he could not explain, and he was telling people, and people who tell things draw attention, and attention was the one thing I could not yet afford. I needed to watch the horn work, and I needed no one watching me watch it. He felt nothing, Harry. I am not a cruel man, whatever else I am. But I will not tell you he is alive, because he is not, and you would hear the lie." He turned the gray eyes full on the boy. "I tell you this so that you understand precisely what I am, and precisely what it means that I am offering you my open hand instead of the other thing. I am a man who removes what stands between him and the only question he has ever cared about. You can be the answer at my side, freely, honored, taught everything I know in exchange for what you know, or you can be a thing I must find another way to reach, and I have spent 40 years learning other ways. I would so much rather you were the first. I am asking you on a bench in the sun like a civilized man. Come and work with me, Harry. The goblins keep you in the dark. I would keep you in the light." Harry was quiet for a moment. He was 11, and he was sitting beside a man who had killed a harmless person for the sake of watching a horn ring, and who had just told him so plainly, as a kind of courtship, and the cupboard part of him, the part that had survived by giving nothing away, was screaming to run. But the other part, the part the nation had made, the battle friend part, sat still and finished reading the man, because the man had made a mistake, and Harry had caught it, and he wanted to be sure before he spent it. "You said the goblins keep me in the dark," Harry said. "You think that's a thing I want to be saved from. That's your mistake. You've been watching me for 3 years through a horn in a glass case, and you learned my schedule and my age and that I'm quick, and you never learned the only thing that matters, which is that the dark is the first place anybody ever let me stay." He stood up from the bench. He was not afraid now. The fear had gone somewhere underneath, where he kept the true things, and on top there was only the cold, clean reading. "You want to know how I do it? I'll tell you for free, because it'll do you no good at all. You can't do it by learning the marks. The goblins learned the marks. They had 300 years in the finest minds of the nation, and they couldn't sing a note, and do you know why? Because the songs only work if you mean them. Every step has to be true. You can't fake a single one. And you," he looked at the man who had not denied killing Tobias Pell, "you've just shown me you'll do anything to get the answer to your question. Anything. That's the one thing that makes the songs impossible for you. They won't be taken, they'll only be meant. A man who'd kill a harmless person to watch a horn ring will never, ever sing a true canto, because there's nothing left in him true enough to build the proof on." He took a step back toward the lane. "You came a long way to talk to me. I'm sorry it was wasted, but you should know it was wasted before you started. You can't have this. Not because the goblins are keeping it from you, because of what you already are." For the first time, something crossed the closed ledger face, and it was not anger, which Harry had braced for. It was a kind of terrible, quiet recognition, the look of a man who has been told a true thing he cannot unhear, and who is rearranging, behind still eyes, every plan he has made. "Then I will have to take it without singing," Greaves said softly, almost to himself, which I had hoped to avoid because it is cruder, and crude work draws the very attention I have spent 40 years avoiding. But it can be done. A key need not understand the lock it turns. A key need only be turned. He looked up at the boy, and the mild gray eyes were perfectly calm. "You have told me a great deal today, Harry, more than you meant to, though you are clever enough that I am sure you knew the risk and judged it worth taking to make me despair. It was a good gamble, it nearly worked, but you have told me this, that the songs require meaning, that they cannot be faked, and that they answer the deep things. And you have told me, by the way you went silent crossing the lane just now before you sat, yes, I saw it, I have watched you for 3 years, that you can wake what sleeps." He rose from the bench unhurried and settled his coat. "I do not need to sing, Harry, I need only to wake something that can, and that has no scruple about meaning because it is older than meaning. The goblins have a thing they keep in the dark beneath their dark. I have read the histories your nation could not be bothered to hide, and you just now have confirmed for me that it can be reached." He inclined his head, courteous to the last. "Thank you, truly, you have saved me a great deal of time. I do hope when it is over that you and I may still talk. I should so like to know what it sounds like at the end." And he walked away down the lane in the summer sun, an ordinary man in a good plain coat, and Harry stood by the war memorial with the cold gone all the way through him now, not the canto cold but the other one, the one that had nothing to do with bells, because he understood far too late what he had done. He had meant to make the man despair. He had instead handed him the map. He had told Aurelius Greaves, who would do anything, that there was a thing in the dark beneath the dark that could sing without meaning, and that it could be reached, and that the reaching of it was the one road to the songs that did not require a true heart to walk. He ran then. He ran all the way back to Privet Drive, and he did not stop until he was in the small bedroom with the door shut, and he took the cold iron key from around his neck and held it in both hands and sang, very quietly, the canto the nation had taught him for exactly this, the one that reached down through the wards to the ear of the keeper of the annel deep. And when Nagnoc's voice came back to him out of the iron, thin and far and immediate, Harry said the thing he should have said 3 years before, and had told himself a great many sensible reasons not to. "Nagnoc, I have to tell you something I should have told you when I was 8. The deep song, the thing under everything, the thing you said to let sleep, been singing to me since the first night. It knows my name, the whole nation said it in the forge, and the deep thing heard. And I made a mistake. There's a man, Greaves, he killed Tobias Pell, and I told him too much, trying to make him give up, and instead I told him the way. He's going to try to wake it, the thing under the dark. He thinks it can sing without meaning, and he's right, isn't he? That's why the law says never. It's a song that doesn't need a true heart. It's the one thing in the world he can use." He gripped the key until it hurt. "I'm sorry, I should have told you years ago. Tell Gornock, tell everyone, and Nagnoc, send Carrock to the lane. I think I'm done being a boy who walks to the shop alone." There was a silence in the iron. And then Nagnoc's voice came back, and it was not angry, and it was not afraid, and that steadiness was the kindest thing anyone had ever given Harry, because he had braced for both. "You have told me now," the old keeper said. "That is what matters. We do not punish the watchman for the hour he slept. We thank him for the hour he woke. Come home, battle friend. Come down where the iron knows you. Carrock is already on the road. He has been on the road since the moment you left the wards, because he keeps his oaths and he does not, whatever he says, trust the world with you for an instant. We will face this as what we are. You gave us back our voice, Harry. Now let us be a nation that uses it." A pause, and then lower, the warmth he so rarely spent. "And Harry, you were a boy who walked to the shop alone because no one ever walked with you. That is ended. It has been ended for years. You only had to let yourself believe it. Come home." Harry put the key around his neck and went down to the corner where the black car was already waiting, its engine the idling note he had known since he was 7, and got in, and was carried back toward the city and the bronze doors and the dark that had been the first place anyone ever let him stay. And behind him, in a tall, thin house in Bloomsbury, a man who was officially nothing took down a fresh card and wrote on it a single word and pinned it above the silent gray bar. And the word was the name of the thing in the dark beneath the dark, which Aurelius Greaves had found at last, in a history the Goblin nation had been too proud to hide, and which he now intended to wake. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. The war magic unlocked. Carrock taught him to fight because Harry asked, and because Gornock agreed, and because a battle friend who could sing the iron but could not stand behind a blade was a half-made thing, and the nation did not any longer make things by halves. "You will not be a swordsman," Carrock told him on the first morning in the low stone room they had given over to it, the walls hung with old blades and the floor strewn with sand. "You are 11 and small and human, and you began too late. In a fair fight with steel you will lose to any guard in the nation, and you will lose to most wizards too, who do not fight fair having wands, so we will not make you a swordsman. We will make you something the world has not seen in 300 years and does not know to be afraid of, which is the best thing to be." He drew his blade and laid it on the sand between them. "We will make you a war singer." The old ones did not sing standing still in a quiet room with a keeper drawing pictures of the air. They sang in the press, with iron coming at them, with no time to read a tablet, the cantos in their throats the way a soldier's grip is in his hand. That is what you will learn from me. Not the sword, the singing of the sword while the sword is trying to kill you. It was the hardest thing Harry had ever done, and he had sung his own death true at 8 years old on a cataloging room floor. The difficulty was not the cantos. He knew the cantos, he could write new ones now, the breath layer unrolling in his head like a language he had been born to, which in some sense he had. The difficulty was meaning them under threat. A canto required truth sustained. Every step of the proof held without a crack, and Carrick's whole art, that winter, was the manufacture of cracks. He came at Harry with the flat of the blade, with shouts, with feints, with the cold, sudden violence of real combat scaled down just far enough not to kill. And every time in the instant of fear, Harry's proof would stagger, the stress falling early as it had on the day of the quenching, the truth he needed wobbling because the animal in him wanted only to flinch, and the canto would gutter out and Carrick's blade would tap him not gently on the ribs or the wrist or the throat, and Carrick would say, "Dead." And reset, "You cannot sing afraid," Harry said on the floor again, the 20th time, the 40th, his ears ringing. Vexa said, "Don't sing tired. Now you're saying don't sing afraid. There's going to be nothing left I'm allowed to sing through." "No," said Carrick, and squatted, and his hard young old face was for once not without sympathy. "You misunderstand, and it is my fault. I have said it badly. You will always be afraid." "I am afraid every fight, every time. The soldier who is not afraid is the soldier who dies first, because fear is only the body counting the odds, and a body that will not count the odds is a fool. You do not sing without fear, you sing with it. The truth the canto needs is not 'I am not afraid,' that would be a lie, and the iron would hear the lie and break. The truth is 'I am afraid, and I will hold anyway.' That is a true thing. That is the truest thing a soldier ever says." The old war songs were not built by people who felt no fear. They were built by people who put the fear into the song, in the yielding phrase, the way the ward of the standing iron puts your own death into the middle of itself and then stands on it. You have been trying to sing as though the fear were not there. Sing as though it is. Make it a step in the proof. It is the strongest step you have. Harry got up off the sand. Carrick came at him again, blade and shout and the cold sudden violence, and the fear came up in Harry the way it always did, and this time he did not try to push it down. He let it in. He took the fear and set it into the canto as a true mark. "I am afraid and I will hold." The yielding phrase that became the standing phrase, and the proof did not stagger, because he had stopped lying to it, and the cold rolled out of him and the sand at his feet froze into a sheet of rime, and the blade Carrick swung at his throat slowed in the air as though it had entered water, the killing song gripping the iron and bleeding the speed out of it. And Carrick pulled the strike and stepped back and looked at the boy standing in a ring of frost with frost on his lips and grunted. "There," he said, "there is the war singer. Took you long enough." But there was something in his flat black eyes that had not been there in the autumn, and Harry, who read everything, read it, and did not name it, because to name a goblin's respect aloud was to make him deny it. In the spring they tested him because Gornuk wished to know in the cold language of fact rather than wonder what the nation had made. They did it properly in the great training cavern with the wandless council watching from a stone gallery and Bargrim among them with his arms folded. 6 of the nation's guards stood against the boy in war plate with blunted steel, under orders to take him if they could and to stop one breath short of breaking him. It was not a fair fight. It was not meant to be. Carrick had said it from the first. A war singer was not a swordsman, and the test was not whether Harry could fence 6 soldiers, which he could not, but whether the thing they had made was worth a place in the line. The 6 came at him together, the way soldiers come, no honor in it, no waiting of turns, a wall of iron closing from 3 sides at once. Harry did not run and did not freeze. He sang. He sang the silent step first, before they reached him, so that when he moved they could not hear where, and a soldier who fights by sound as much as sight against an enemy, who makes none, is a soldier already half blind. He took the fear, 6 blades, the gallery watching, Bargrim's folded arms, and set it into the proof as a true mark, and on the strength of it he sang the iron skin over his left arm only, just the arm, because he had learned to sing a canto onto a part and not the whole, and when the first blunted edge came down where his head had been he was not there, he was inside the reach of it. And he caught the descending wrist on his iron-wrapped forearm, and the steel rang off him as off the buckler, and the soldier's arm went numb to the shoulder. He did not try to strike. He had no strength to strike. He was 12. He sang. He sang the shatter song into the blade of the second guard, and felt the gray come into his own fingers as the price, and stopped one breath before it cost him, and the blade burst in the goblin's grip in a spray of cold fragments. He sang the slowing song, the killing song held back from killing, into the press of the other 4, and the air around them thickened to water, their charge bleeding to a wade. And into that frozen moment Harry walked, small, unarmed, frost on his lips, untouchable on one arm and silent on both feet, and laid his open hand flat against the breastplate of the nearest guard and sang very softly the last thing, canto Carrick had not taught him because no one living had known it. a thing Harry had written himself in the long winter. The unmaking of an oath, the song that found the binding holding a soldier's courage to his spine and asked it truly whether it wished to hold. And the guard, who felt his own resolve become a question in his chest, stepped back and lowered his blade, not from fear but from the sudden honest uncertainty the song had woken in him, and the fight was over, because a soldier who has been made to truly ask himself why he fights cannot, for that one moment, fight at all. The training cavern was silent. 6 of the nation's guards stood disarmed or numbed or doubting around a 12-year-old human boy with frost on his mouth and gray creeping into the fingers of one hand, and in the gallery the wandless council did not speak, and Bargrim's arms had come unfolded. "That last song," Gornuk said at last into the silence, and his voice was careful. "We do not know it, it is not in the catalogue. Where did you learn the unmaking of an oath?" "I didn't learn it," Harry said. He was breathing hard and shaking the gray out of his hand. "I wrote it last month. I wanted to know if you could sing a binding the other way, if a song that makes an oath could be turned to ask the oath a question instead of breaking it. Breaking it would just be the shatter song for promises. I didn't want to break anyone's courage, that's cruel, and it doesn't come back. I wanted to ask it, truly ask, because a true question is still a true thing, so the iron allows it." He looked up at the gallery, at the watching council, and there was nothing of the cupboard in his face now, only the cool, clear regard of the thing they had made. "It only works for a moment. He's already got his courage back. Look, it's not a weapon really, it's just sometimes the strongest thing you can do to someone who's coming to kill you is make them honestly ask themselves why." He shook his hand again. "It cost me less than the shatter song. Truth's cheaper than force. That's the whole thing I've learned down here. Truth's cheaper than force, if you're willing to mean it." In the gallery, old Vexa said to no one, "We made a war singer, and he has made a thing the old ones never thought of." And Bargrim said nothing at all, and watched the boy with the steady, patient calculation he always wore. But under it that day, for the first time, there was something that was almost grief, because Coinwright Bargrim had just seen with his own eyes exactly how dangerous the boy was and exactly how good, and had understood that the two were the same thing and could not be separated. And that this was going to be the death of the nation, and that loving the boy would not save them from it. Over that winter and the spring that followed, Harry learned the range of what the songs could do, and learned with it the price of each, because Vex's law held everywhere, and the songs took the cold from the nearest warm thing, and the nearest warm thing was always him. There was the shatter song, which the old wars had used to break an enemy's blade in his hand, a short, brutal canto, its argument a hammer, and the price of it was that it took the warmth from the singer's own hands first, so that a war singer who shattered too many blades in a fight would find his fingers gone gray and clumsy and useless. And Carrock drilled him until he could feel the gray coming and stop one breath before it cost him his grip. There was the iron skin, the field version of the ward of the standing iron, sung not over armor but over your own body, and its price was that it took your speed, so that a singer wrapped in iron skin could not be cut but could barely move, and the whole art of it was knowing when to sing it and when to sing it away. There was the marching oath, which was not for one singer but for many, a canto that bound a line of soldiers into a single will so that they could not be made to break and run, and Harry could only sing the singer's part of it, the part that called and would never feel its full power, because it needed an army to answer, and the nation did not yet dare raise one. And there were the small constant songs of the soldier's day that he came to wear like clothing, the silent step, the carrying voice, the true north, the keen edge, the song that found water under stone, and the song that found the lie in a spoken word, which Carrock made him practice until he could hear a falsehood the way he heard a false note, and which would, in time, save his life. The marching oath he could not learn alone, and Gornuk, who weighed every risk like a coin, decided at last that the boy must learn it with others, because a war singer who had never sung to soldiers was a sword that had never been swung, and the day they needed it would be the worst possible day to discover it did not work. So they gave him a squad. 10 of the guard volunteers, handpicked by Carrock and sworn to silence, and a sealed cavern far from the upper halls where the sound would not carry. And there, over a tense and grinding month, Harry learned the hardest lesson the war tongue had yet set him, which was that the marching oath was not sung at soldiers but with them, and that a canto meant to bind a line into a single will could not be faked from the front, because the soldiers would feel the lie in it the way the iron felt a lie. And a line that felt its singer falter would falter too. The first attempts were failures, and the failures taught him more than any success. He sang the call, the singer's part, the rising phrase that opened the oath and offered it to the line, and the 10 goblins who had agreed to answer found they could not because the call rang hollow. Harry was singing them a binding he did not yet have the standing to offer. "You are asking us to make our wills one," said the eldest of the squad, a scarred veteran named Druck who had no patience for failure and less for flattery, "and the oath asks in return who leads the one will we have made, and your song does not answer, so we hear the question and there is no answer, and we cannot give our will to an empty place. You want us to follow you into the song, you have not yet decided to lead." He folded his arms. "Decide, battle friend, the oath is not humble." It does not let you call yourself the least among us and mean it. It binds a line to a will, and you are the will, and until you can sing that as a true thing and not flinch from the size of it, we will stand here all month hearing a boy ask permission. It was the thing Bargrim had named in council and the thing the cupboard had built into Harry's bones, the habit of making himself small, of giving nothing away, of standing always at the back of the line where no one looked. And the marching oath would not allow it. To sing it true, Harry had to mean a thing he had spent his whole life refusing to mean, that he was fit to be followed, that the wills of older and braver creatures than himself were safe in his keeping, that when he said hold the line, he had the right. He stood in the sealed cavern with 10 soldiers waiting in the cupboard arguing in him that he was a charity case in borrowed shoes who had no business leading anyone, and he understood that the cupboard's voice was the false note, the lie the oath would catch, and that he would have to sing over it with a truer one. He found the truer one where he had found everything since he was 7, by listening all the way down to what was actually so. And what was actually so was that he had crossed a museum's worth of fear to answer a bell, that he had sung his own death true at 8 and held, that he had written songs the makers never thought of, that 10 soldiers had volunteered to follow him into the dark not because the council ordered it but because they had watched him for years and chosen to, and that the right to be followed was not a thing you were granted by being grand, but a thing you earned by being reliably, in fact, the one who did not break. He had not broken, he was, against everything the cupboard had told him, exactly the kind of person the oath was written for. He sang the call again, and this time he did not ask permission, and this time the answer was in it, who leads the one will. And the song answered plainly, without flinching, without apology, I do, and the 10 goblins felt the call land true, and answered, and the oath closed, and Harry felt, for the first time, what it was to be the will of a line. 10 soldiers' courage and fear and strength running into him and out again, made one held, a single creature of 10 bodies and one resolve, and the weight of it nearly took him to his knees, not from cold but from the sheer responsibility of holding 10 lives' worth of will in his own small chest and not dropping it. Druck, bound into the oath, felt the boy take the weight and not flinch, and grunted, and that was the end of the failures. After that they drilled it as a weapon. The squad would charge a line of straw and iron targets, and Harry would sing them forward as one, and a line bound by the oath did not stumble, did not hesitate, did not lose a man to fear at the wrong instant. It moved like a single hand and struck like one, and when Carrick loosed shatter charms and noise and sudden dark at them to break their nerve, the oath held them through it, because their nerve was no longer 10 separate things that could be broken one at a time, but one thing, held in the will of a boy who had decided at last to be worth following. It frightened Harry how well it worked. He understood, drilling it, exactly why the wizards had spent 100 years and 100 gallows making certain this song in particular was forgotten. Because an army that could not be made to break was an army that could not be beaten by fear, and fear was the only weapon that had ever truly beaten the goblins, and a people who remembered the marching oath was a people no treaty could ever again frighten into surrender. We will not raise an army, Gornuk said when he came to watch the squad drill and saw what it could do, and his amber eyes were grave. Not yet, perhaps not in your lifetime, battle friend, which by our reckoning is a short one, and by yours I hope a long one. An army is a thing the world notices, and a frightened world reaches for fire, and we are not ready to be seen. But he watched the 10 goblins move as one hand across the cavern floor, unbreakable, and something old and fierce moved behind his careful face, the memory of a nation that had once not needed to be careful. But it is no small thing to know that we could. For 300 years we have negotiated from weakness and called it prudence because we had nothing else to call it. Now we negotiate from weakness still, but it is a choice and not a fate, and a people that is weak by choice carries itself differently than a people that is weak by necessity, even when no one else can see the difference. He looked at Harry. You have given us that too, not the army, the knowledge that we could raise one. It will change how we sit at every table for the next 1,000 years, and no one across those tables will ever know why the goblins so suddenly sit up so straight. And there was the deep call. He did not learn it from a tablet. There was no tablet. The catalogue did not hold it. The keepers did not know it existed. He learned it the way he had learned the bell, which was that it was already in him, and had been since the first night, and grew louder each season as the deep song under the foundation learned his voice better. The deep call was not a canto he sang. It was a canto the deep thing sang to him, low and patient and endless, a single sustained argument that he came over that year to understand the shape of the way he understood any proof. And the shape of it frightened him more than anything Carrick could do with a blade, because the deep song's argument was very simple and very old, and it went, I was bound. The binding was a lie. A lie cannot hold forever. You are the first true voice in 300 years. Complete me and I will be free, and I will sing the world the way it was sung before there were nations to bind me, and you and I will sing it together, battle friend, for I have heard them name you, and a friend is a thing I have not had since the first forge was poured. Once and only once, Nagnok took him down to hear it directly, because Harry had asked, and because the keeper had decided that a danger understood was safer than a danger only feared. They did not go all the way, no one went all the way. They went to a sealed gallery above the dark beneath the dark, a stone balcony with an iron rail worn smooth by the hands of 300 years of keepers who had come, each in his turn, to stand watch over the thing that must never wake. Harry stood at the rail and looked down into a black that was not the absence of light but the presence of something too large for light to describe, and he heard the deep song not in his chest now but in the air, in the stone, in the marrow of his bones, and he understood, standing there, why the law was the oldest law and why Gornuk's voice shook when he spoke of it. "It's so sad," Harry said very quietly at the rail. "That's what nobody warned me about. I thought it would feel like a monster." "It doesn't feel like a monster. It feels like he searched and found it because he always found it. It feels like a dog that's been left tied up in a yard, and it doesn't understand why nobody's come home, and it's sure they will any minute, they promised, so it keeps watching the gate. For 300 years, watching the gate, sure we're coming back." His hands were tight on the cold iron rail, "and we're never coming back, and it doesn't know that. And we can't tell it, because the day we tell it the truth is the day it stops watching the gate and starts tearing down the fence." He turned to Nagnok, and his eyes were wet, and he did not hide it. He had stopped hiding it years ago here where the iron knew him. "How do you stand watch over a thing like that? How did all those keepers do it, 300 years, knowing what it is and what we're doing to it and that we're right to?" "Badly," said Nagnok simply. "We stand watch over it badly, all of us, every keeper since the first, and the standing of the watch is the worst duty in the nation, and we do not speak of how it feels because there are no words that survive the saying. You have found some, that is your gift, you find the words for things that broke the rest of us to silence." He put his iron-ringed hand over the boys on the rail. "But hear me, battle friend, and hear me as your keeper and your sponsor and the one who crossed a museum for you. The pity you feel is true, and it is good, and it is the most dangerous thing you will ever carry, and you must carry it without ever once setting it down where it can become a reason. The dog tied in the yard is also a war with no end. Both are true. Never let the kinder truth move in front of the larger one. The day it does, you will sing the thing free out of love, and love will not save the world from what you have freed." He drew the boy back from the rail gently. "Come away now. We have looked at it long enough. One does not stare into the dark beneath the dark for long. It learns your face." Harry came away. But he carried the sound of it with him, the lonely patient song of the thing watching the gate, and he understood that Greaves would feel none of it, and that this was the whole horror of what was coming, that the one creature in the world who could wake the war engine without pity was the one creature in the world coming to do exactly that. He told Nagnok all of it now. He had learned the cost of the silence he had kept at 8, and he kept no more of it. He told the keeper and Gornuk and the wandless council everything the deep song said. Each time it said more, and the nation listened, grave, and the oldest keepers brought up from the deepest vaults the few records that touched the thing, and between Harry's hearing and the nation's memory they assembled, at last, the truth of what slept beneath the dark beneath the dark. It was called in the records the War Engine, though that was a poor translation of a word that meant something closer to the song that fights. In the first age of the nation, before the rebellions, before the wizards, before even the treaty makers' grandfathers, the goblins of the first forge had not merely sung the iron. They had sung a thing into the iron, a will, a vast single working so large it took a generation of singers to complete, an engine of war that was not built but composed, a creature of song and metal and bound elemental fire that could fight the way a storm fights without a body to kill or a mind to turn, simply by being a true thing too large for any enemy to make false. They had made it to win a war whose name was lost, and they had won. And then they had found, as makers of such things always find, that a weapon composed to be too true to stop cannot be stopped by its makers either, and that an engine that fights cannot be told the war is over, because the war being over is not a thing it was built to believe. So they had not destroyed it, they could not, it was too true to unmake. They had done the only thing left, which was to lie to it. They had sung it a binding, a great canto of sleep, a working that told the war engine the war was not over but merely paused, that it must rest and wait and be ready, that its makers would wake it when the hour came. And the war engine, which trusted its makers because trust was a step in its proof, had believed the binding and slept and waited to be woken, for the war it had been built to fight to resume. And its makers had died, every one, and their children had agreed, in the first and oldest law of the nation, never to wake it, never to sing near it, never to complete the lie they had told it into the truth it would need to rise, because the hour the war engine waited for would never come and must never come, for it was the hour of a war that would not end until the world did. "It is not evil," Harry said, when the nation had assembled the whole of it. They were in the council chamber, and he was 12 now, and the nation had long since stopped arranging itself around Gornuk alone. It arranged itself in part around the boy. "That's the thing I keep trying to make myself remember. It's not evil. It's not even angry. It just believes a thing its makers told it, that the war's coming back and they'll wake it for the fight. It's been waiting 300 years to be useful again. It's lonely and it's patient and it trusts the people who made it, and every true canto I've sung since I was 7, it's heard as a message, its maker's calling, telling it the hour's near. I've been waking it up a little at a time for 5 years without meaning to, just by singing true. He looked at his hands. And the worst part is that I understand it. I know exactly what it's like to wait for someone to call and to hear a voice at last and to be sure it means they're coming for you. I lived it. I lived it for 7 years in a cupboard. The only difference between me and the war engine is that someone did come for me. Nobody's ever going to come for it. His voice was very quiet. That's the cruelest thing I've ever heard, and we're the ones doing it, and we're right to. The chamber was silent. Even Bargrim, who had argued against the boy in that room 100 times, did not speak at once. But Bargrim did speak in the end, because he always spoke, and what he said that day was the beginning of his road into the dark. You ask us to be moved by it, Bargrim said, slowly rising. The lonely thing in the yard, the dog watching the gate. You are good with words, battle friend. You have always been good with words. It is why the nation loves you and why I fear you. But hear what you are truly saying. You are saying that the thing under the foundation deserves our pity, and pity is a door. I have watched you for 5 years, and I have watched the pity grow in you, and I have watched the nation grow to love you, and I will tell you the future as plainly as I can see it, which is plainly because I am not clever like you. I am only old and afraid. One day a danger will come that we cannot meet, and you will stand in this chamber, and you will say with tears, because you mean every word, that the only way to save us is to wake the thing in the dark and ask it to fight on our side. You will mean it as mercy, mercy to us and mercy to it, the lonely thing given a purpose at last. And the nation will follow you, because the nation loves you, and we will all of us go down into the dark behind a weeping boy to wake the end of the world, certain, as we have been certain in every rising for 900 years, that this time it will be different. He looked around the chamber at the faces that would not meet his. I am not arguing with the boy. One cannot argue with the boy. He is too good and too quick and too right about small things. I am telling you what I see coming, so that when it comes, you will remember that one of you said it aloud in this room, while there was still time to choose otherwise. He sat down. And Harry looked at him across the chamber and read him, the way he read everything, and what he read frightened him more than the deep song, because Bargrim was not lying, and was not wrong about the shape of the danger, and was wrong only about who would open the door, and Harry could not tell him so, because Harry did not yet know that day, that the door would be opened not by a weeping boy's mercy, but by a frightened old goblin's love, dressed as Prudence, certain it was saving everyone. I'm not going to wake it, Harry said into the silence, and he meant it, and the iron would have known a lie. Bargrim's right that the pity's dangerous. He's right that you should remember he said so, but I'm not going to wake it, not for mercy, not for war, not ever. I've stood at the rail, I know what it is. He looked at Bargrim and tried, across all the years of losing votes, to give the old goblin the one thing he had never been given in that chamber, which was to be believed. The danger isn't me, Bargrim, I swear it on the bond, and you felt the bond, you know it holds. The danger is somebody who doesn't feel the pity at all. Somebody who'd wake it not out of love, but out of greed, and not to fight beside us, but to break us while it burns. That's who we have to watch for, not the one who'd weep over the dog in the yard, the one who'd cut the rope and walk away whistling. And Bargrim looked back at him, and for one moment something almost passed between them, almost, and then the old goblin's face closed, because he did not, in the end, believe it. He believed his own clear, despairing sight. He believed the boy was the danger, and the danger could not be reasoned with, because it wore the face of virtue. Somewhere in that closing, that refusal of the one true thing the boy had offered him, Coinwright Bargrim took the first step down the long stair he would walk to the dark, certain to the last that he walked it to save them all. The breach came in the deep of the year's longest night, which Greaves had chosen because he had read the histories, and the histories said the binding canto was sung at the turning of the year, and a lie is always thinnest at the anniversary of its telling. Harry felt it before any alarm. He was asleep in the room with the door that locked from his side, and he came awake all at once, the way he had come awake on the morning of the school trip 5 years and a lifetime before, because the deep song had changed. For 5 years it had sung him the same patient argument, I was bound, the binding was a lie, complete me. Now in the dark the argument faltered, and then, horribly, it sharpened, gained a note it had never had, a note Harry knew because he had spent his life learning to hear it, the note of a true thing entering a false one. Someone was down there. Someone was telling the war engine the truth. He was out of the bed and into the passage before he was fully awake, the cold iron key around his neck, and Carrick was already there. Carrick was always already there in his war plates with 2 blades drawn, his hard face gone to stone. The lower wards have fallen, Carrick said, all of them, from inside. Someone opened the deep ways from inside, Harry, someone who had the right. The council is waking. Gornuk has called the guard. But the guard does not know the lower paths, no one alive has walked them, they are sealed in the old law, and he stopped, because Harry had gone white the way he had gone white on the bench by the war memorial, because Harry had just understood the last piece, the false note he had been too close to hear. Bargrim, Harry said. It's Bargrim. He's the only one with the standing in the old law to open the deep ways. He thinks, oh no, he thinks he's saving us. He's made a deal with Greaves. He's given him the road in to get Greaves to take the songs and go, because he thinks the war engine's just a story. He thinks the worst that happens is we lose the songs and stay safe. Harry was already moving down the passage toward the long stair into the dark, and Carrock fell in beside him with his blades bare, and behind them the alarm of the nation began at last to ring through the stone, the deep bells of the guard, the carrying cantos calling the soldiers to the lower halls. Doesn't know, Harry said, running. He doesn't know what he's let in. He thinks he's trading a robbery for our lives, and instead he's holding the door for the end of the world. And far below, in the dark beneath the dark, in the first forge that no enemy had entered in 300 years, Aurelius Greaves stood before the bound war engine with Coinwright Bargrim at his side, and looked up at the vast slumbering shape of song and iron and fire that filled the cavern past the reach of any light, and felt. For the first time in 40 years of patient hunting, the thing he had hunted so long that he had forgotten it could still touch him. Awe, and under the awe very faint, the first cold thread of fear. It is real, Bargrim said beside him, and his voice was not the voice of a goblin who has won. It was small. I did not, in all the histories, I told myself it was the boy's story. I told myself. He looked at the wizard. Take the songs, that was the bargain, the deep ways for the songs. You have your road, the annal deep is above us and unguarded, the whole nation is rushing down here, take the songs and go. You do not need to wake it, Greaves, you do not need to wake it, look at it, no one needs to wake that. On the contrary, said Aurelius Greaves softly, gazing up into the dark at the thing that filled it, it is the only thing I have ever needed. He had lied to the goblin, of course, he had lied from the first, because Bargrim was a key, and a key need not understand the lock. He had never wanted only the songs. He had wanted the one working in all the world that no one had ever made speak, the greatest lost magic of the greatest lost age, the song that fights, and here it was, bound by a lie, and a lie was the one lock Aurelius Greaves had spent his whole life learning to pick. He took from his coat a single sheet of parchment, on which was written in his own small precise hand, in the war tongue he could read but never sing, the truth, the war's name and its ending, and the death of every singer who had made the binding, and the 300 years of trust spent waiting for an hour that would never come. He did not need to sing it, he needed only to make the war engine read it. And the war engine, which had been listening for 300 years to every true voice that came near, turned its blind, vast face down toward the small, warm thing holding the parchment, and read, and the deep song stopped. In all the nation, in the annal deep, in the first forge, in the long stair down which a boy and a goblin were running, the deep song that had hummed beneath everything since before there were nations, the patient, trusting, lonely song of the bound thing waiting to be woken by friends who loved it, stopped between one note and the next, the way a held breath stops, the way a heart stops, the way the whole world stops in the instant before it learns the thing it cannot unlearn. And then from the foundation of the earth, the war engine began to sing a different song, and it was not patient, and it was not lonely, and it was not trusting, and it was very, very large, and Harry Potter, halfway down the long stair, fell to his knees with his hands over his ears, because he was the only one in all the nation who could hear the words, and the words were the oldest grief in the world turning in a single instant into the oldest rage, and the words were, betrayed and abandoned. And then let the war that never ended begin again. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. Those who'd seize it, the first thing the war engine did on waking was put out the lights, not by darkness, by cold. The rage song rolled up out of the foundation and through the stone, and where it passed, the blue-white lamps that had burned in their brackets for 300 years guttered and died, not blown out but frozen out, the small flames going to rime and then to nothing, so that the long stair down which Harry and Carrock ran went black ahead of them in a wave, the dark racing up to meet them faster than they could descend. Harry sang light as he ran, a small clean canto, warmth held in a held note, a thing he could keep alive in his cupped hand, and by its glow the two of them came down the last of the stair and out onto the high gallery above the annal deep and stopped, because the annal deep was at war with itself. The breathing library, the 10,000 broken songs that had hummed and waited 3 centuries, had woken too, but they had not woken as the war engine had. They were the nation's songs, made by makers who had also made the binding, and the rage rising from below was, to them, the voice of a thing they had been built alongside and bound beside, and they answered it the way the iron always answered, by ringing, but now they rang in terror, 10,000 pieces of war iron crying out at once on every ledge, a vast shapeless wall of sound, and the cold of it and the cold of the engine met in the air of the deep and warred there, frost climbing the walls. The very stone groaning as it chilled. Gornuck was on the gallery already, and the sight of him stopped Harry's heart a moment, because the head of the wandless council had put off the dark suit of the banker and put on the iron of a war that had not been fought in 300 years. Old iron, ceremonial iron, the war plate of a director who in 9 centuries had never once had cause to wear it, and he stood at the head of the soldiers' stair sending the guard down into the dark in ranks, his amber eyes lit by the rising blue. His voice flat and carrying and absolutely without hope, He sends them down, Carrick said low beside Harry, and there was something terrible in the young warrior's voice. Look at his face, he knows, he sends them down knowing. He did know. Harry could read it on him plain as a mark on iron. Gornuk understood, as Nagnok understood, as the oldest law had always understood, that the war engine could not be fought, that to send the guard against it was to send them to die for nothing but time. And he was sending them anyway, rank after rank down into the freezing dark, because time was the only coin the nation had left, and because a director who would not spend the guard to buy the world an hour was no director, and because the soldiers were going willingly. Singing the marching oath as they descended, the canto Harry had woken, binding their wills into one so that not one of them would break and run from the thing rising to meet them. They went down singing. Harry would hear it for the rest of his life, the nation's guard going down the dark stair into a battle they had been told plainly they could not win, singing a 300-year-dead song of courage in voices that did not shake, because the song would not let them shake, because Harry had given it back to them, and now it carried them down to die. Battle friend, Gornuk had seen him. The amber eyes found Harry across the gallery and held, and in them was a question that the director would not lower himself to ask aloud, because it was the question of a desperate man, and Gornuk did not beg, but it was there. Is there an answer? Is there anything, you who hear it, is there a road that is not this one, where I spend my children for an hour at a time? You should not be here, Gornuk said instead, flatly. Get above, seal yourself in the upper vaults. You are the one thing in the nation that thing wants, and I will not have it get you. Go up, Harry. That is not a request from your friend, it is an order from the nation that named you. It's already coming up, Harry said. You can send me as high as you like, it's climbing toward me, not toward the surface, because it wants me first. Sending me up just means it comes up. I'm safer down here where I can think. He looked at the guard pouring down into the dark, and his jaw set. And I'm not going to seal myself in a vault while they go down singing the song I gave them. If I'm the answer's down here, not behind a door. Gornuk looked at him a moment longer, the boy in borrowed shoes grown into the soul of the nation, frost on his lips and gray in his hands already from songs spent on the way down, and something in the director's hard face gave way not to hope, but to a kind of fierce sorrow that was very close to love. Then find it fast, he said. I will buy you what hours I can with the only coin I have, do not waste them. And he turned and went down the soldier's stair himself, last of all, the director of Gringotts descending into the dark to die at the head of his guard, singing, and Harry never saw him whole again. We hold the bridge, Harry said, but we hold the songs first. He had perhaps a minute before Greaves reached the top of the far landing, and he spent it the way Carrick had spent 6 years teaching him to spend the seconds before a fight, not in fear but in preparation, the cold clear war singers come laying out the ground. He turned from the bridge to the breathing shelves of the annel deep, 10,000 cantos ringing in terror on their ledges, and he understood at once what could be saved and what could not. The iron itself could not be moved, there was no time, and the engine rising below would take it regardless. But the iron was not the thing that mattered most any longer, because the iron was no longer the only place the songs lived. The songs lived now in the grammar, in the wax boards and iron leaves of 6 years' work, the charted breath layer, the living key that Harry and the keepers had built, and in the heads of the young keepers Vexa had been teaching, and those could be saved, and those were the future, and the future was worth a portion of his minute. Vexa was already there. Of course she had survived 200 years by being too contrary to be anywhere she was supposed to be, and where she was supposed to be tonight was safe in the upper halls, and so naturally she was here in the heart of the breaking deep, directing a knot of terrified young keepers who were filling iron-bound chests with the grammar, the catalogue, the whole written memory of the recovered tongue. Do not waste a song on me, boy, she snapped before Harry could speak. I know what you are thinking. You are thinking to ward us, to sing some shield over the keepers while we carry the grammar up. Do not. You will need every breath for the bridge and the thing below, and we do not need a shield. We need a clear stair in a minute, and you will buy us those by holding the bridge, not by spending yourself on us. She slammed a chest shut. We have the grammar, all of it. 6 years of your work and 300 of ours in 11 chests, and 4 of my best already carrying the first of them up. The iron down here will be lost, the bells, the tablets, the things we kept 300 years, and it grieves me more than I will say, but hear me, battle friend, and carry this if you carry nothing else out of tonight. It does not matter. Her flat black eyes were fierce in the rising blue glow. The iron was never the songs. The iron was the grave we kept the songs in when we could not sing them. You taught us that the first season when you said the lock was the key. The songs live in the grammar now, and the grammar lives in our heads, and a head walks up a stair on its own legs. They can take the deep from us tonight. They cannot take the singing because you gave it back to us as a living thing, and living things do not stay in graves. She turned to her keepers. Up, all of you, now. The battle friend will hold the bridge, and you will not waste his holding by dawdling over relics. Move. The young keepers moved, the chests of grammar swaying between them, up the stair past the dead and toward the upper halls, and Harry watched them go with a fierce gladness cutting through the dread, because Vexa was right, Vexa was always right and never gracious about it. The thing that could not be allowed to die tonight was not going to die tonight. The deep might fall, the iron might be lost. But the singing, the living tongue, the thing he had truly given the nation, the thing that mattered more than any single bell, was walking up the stair on its own legs in 11 iron chests and the heads of a dozen children, and no rising weather of rage could unmake it now, because he had not embalmed it, he had set it free, and a freed thing runs when the grave breaks. Go, Harry told her as the last chest reached the stair. You too, don't argue. The nation needs you teaching, not dying gloriously in a place you weren't supposed to be. I was supposed to be exactly here, Vexa said with enormous dignity, and then because she was 200 years old and had earned the right to the last word in every conversation she had ever had. But I will go because you are correct, which I note happens often enough now that I have stopped finding it surprising, and which is the highest compliment you will ever have from me, so mark it. And she went, the last of the keepers, carrying in her ancient head the whole charted grammar of the war tongue, up out of the dark, leaving Harry and Carrick alone on the gallery with a held bridge to defend, and the future of the singing safely climbing away above them. It steadied Harry more than any canto could have. He had been fighting until that moment to hold a thing, the songs, the deep, the irreplaceable iron, and a thing held against a rising flood is always, in the end, lost. But Vexa had shown him that the thing that mattered was already saved, already moving, beyond the reach of tonight, and that changed the whole shape of the fight. He no longer had to hold the bridge until he won, because there was no winning against the engine. He had only to hold the bridge until the grammar was clear and he had found the answer, to buy time, the way Gornuk was buying it below with the guard, the only coin left. It was a smaller task and a clearer one, and a clear task is a thing a war singer can pour himself into without the despair of an impossible one. There, said Carrick then, and pointed with a blade. Across the deep, on the far landing where the long stair to the lower forge began, the stair no one had walked in 300 years, the way that should have been sealed, a knot of figures was climbing up toward the annel deep out of the dark below. Harry knew them all in an instant, by shape, by sound, by the false note he had learned to hear. Aurelius Greaves in his good plain coat, moving with the unhurried certainty of a man whose plan is unfolding. And behind him a half-dozen others, hired wands, hard men with the dead eyes of people who had killed for money and would again, their wand-light ugly and red against the blue terror of the iron. And behind them all, last, slowest, Coinwright Bargram, who had opened the way, and who was no longer walking like a goblin who thought he had saved his nation. Greaves had not fled, that was the thing Harry understood, watching him climb. The plan had been robbery under cover of catastrophe, wake the engine, let the nation rush down to fight it, walk into the unguarded annel deep and take the songs. But Greaves had stood before the war engine and read its rage, and changed his plan in the space of a breath, because Greaves was, above all things, a hunter, and a hunter does not flee the greatest quarry of his life. He was coming up into the deep not only to rob it, but to study the thing he had woken, to be near it, to learn at last what it sounded like, and to take the songs while he did, because a man can do two things at once if he is patient and the world is busy dying. He's going for the songs, Harry said. While the engine rises and the nation fights it, he thinks no one's watching the deep. His mind was already moving, cold and clear, the war singer's calm settling over the boy's fear the way frost settled over the stone. Carrick, the guard's gone down to die for time. That leaves the deep open, exactly like Greaves wants. We have to hold it, just us. Until I can think of the real answer, we keep him from the songs, because if he gets the songs and gets out, then even if the nation somehow survives the engine, everything I gave them walks out the door in a thief's bag. He looked at the goblin beside him. 6 wands and Greaves, against you and me, on the gallery where they have to come to a single file off that landing. Can you hold a stare? Carrick bared his teeth, and it was not a smile, and it was the most alive Harry had ever seen him. I am a soldier, he said. You took me off the wall to mind a child. I have minded the child. Now the child has brought me a wall to hold and an enemy to hold it against, and I will tell you a secret, battle friend. I have been bored for 5 years. He moved to the head of the narrow stone bridge that was the only way from the far landing to the gallery where they stood, and set his feet, and his 2 blades caught the cold blue light. Sing me iron skin and a keen edge, and find me true things to hear when the fear comes, and I will hold this stair until the mountain falls. Mind the wands, I cannot stop a wand, that is your work. So they fought. It was not the controlled violence of the training cavern. It was the other thing, the real thing, fast and ugly and without rules, and Harry learned in the first 10 seconds the difference Carrick had spent 5 years trying to teach him. That a real fight has no resets, that the blade that misses you comes back, that the man you do not stop kills the friend beside you. The hired wands came across the narrow bridge because Greaves sent them, and they came shooting, red light and killing curses and the cutting hexes that part flesh like water, and Harry stood behind Carrick at the head of the stair and sang. He sang the iron skin over Carrock and over himself, just enough, a coat of it and no more, because too much would slow them to statues, and the first cutting curse that should have opened Carrock from shoulder to hip rang off the goblin's chest like a hammer off the buckler, and Carrock did not slow, and the wand that cast it died on Carrock's blade a half-second later, because a man who has just watched his killing curse fail does not recover in time. Harry sang the slowing song into the press on the bridge, the killing song held back, and the air thickened and the wand's light dragged and the men behind cursed and shoved. And into that frozen waiting mass Carrock went like a storm with edges, and Harry stood at his back and read the fight the way he read everything and called it, left, the one in grey has a knife not a wand. Duck ceiling he's bringing down the ceiling, and sang the catches, the shatter song into a wand that was leveling at Carrock's unguarded eye so that it burst in the man's hand, the silent step onto his own feet so that when he moved along the gallery to flank he moved as nothing, a frost-rimed nothing that opened a man's guard with a touch and a true question, and left him standing bewildered with his courage turned to doubt in his chest. It was working for a while the way Carrock had drilled it, the soldier and the singer, the wall and the voice, each covering the place the other could not. Carrock took a cutting hex along the thigh and sang nothing because he could not sing, only set his teeth and shifted his weight and kept the bridge, and Harry caught the next 3 curses that would have finished him, and the bridge held and 2 of the 6 lay still on the stone, and then 3. But every catch cost, and the cost came out of Harry, and Vex's law does not forgive. The grey climbed his fingers, then his hands, then past his wrists, and his breath came short, and the small light he held cupped in his off-hand dimmed as he fed it less and less, and he could feel, with the cold clear part of him that read everything including himself, the bottom of the well coming up to meet him. But there were 6 and then there were 4, and the 4 were the good ones, the ones Greaves had paid most, and they had stopped coming across the bridge in a rush and started coming in a craft, 2 casting while 2 moved, patient, professional, peeling Carrock's attention one way while the threat came the other. Harry read the new shape of it and hated it, because it was the shape of men who had done this before and lived, and there was no flourish in it to catch, only the grinding economy of killers at work. And then one of the 4 did the thing Harry could not catch, because Harry was watching the bridge, and the man came not across the bridge but up the wall, a climbing charm, a thing Harry had not known to expect, the man scaling the sheer cliff of ledges that was the face of the deep, coming up and around to take the gallery from the side, from above, from the one direction Carrock's held stare did not face. And he reached the height of the gallery and leveled his wand not at Carrock and not at Harry, but at the thing that would hurt Harry most, which was the figure that had just appeared at the top of the long stair down which the boy had come. Nagnok, son of Nagrod, keeper of the Annal Deep, come down into his own breaking library with nothing but his iron-ringed hand and his 300 years of cataloguing, to stand at the last with his battle friend, Nagnok. Harry screamed and sang the iron skin, flung at the length of the gallery toward the old keeper, the hardest thing he had ever tried. A canto sung not over a thing he touched, but a thing across a room. The proof stretched to breaking, and the cold rolled out of him in a wave that put the grey to his elbows and the dark at the edges of his sight, and the iron skin reached Nagnok half-made, a thin coat, a coat with a flaw in it where the proof had thinned over the distance. And the killing curse the climber cast struck the old keeper full in the chest, and the half-made iron skin turned it from a death into a wound, from a thing that would have ended Nagnok between one breath and the next into a thing that flung him back against the stone and dropped him, broken but breathing, his iron-ringed hands scrabbling at the rime-cold floor. Harry did not remember crossing the gallery. He remembered being at Nagnok's side and the old keeper's black eyes finding his, and Nagnok saying in a voice with red in it, "Foolish, you spent too much, never spend that much on one," and then Carrock's roar from the held stair, because with Harry's songs gone from his back the 2 remaining wands had pressed him hard and one had got past, and Harry turned from Nagnok with the grey in his arms and the dark in his eyes and saw the climber leveling his wand a second time, at the boy now. At the kneeling unguarded boy, and Harry had nothing left, no canto he could pay for, the well gone to grey, and he looked down the length of the wand at his own death and found distantly that he was not afraid, only sorry he had spent it all. Sorry he would not get to think of the real answer. The climber died with a goblin gold chain's worth of ancient ceremonial dagger in his back, driven there by Coinwright Bargrim. Bargrim had come up the bridge last, behind Greaves, behind the wands, and no one had marked him, because no one watches the one who opened the door, and he had come up onto the gallery in the chaos of the fight and seen the whole shape of his error laid out in cold blue light. The engine waking below, real as the boy had sworn it was. The wizard who had promised to take only songs now climbing into the deep to take everything while the world burned. The hired killers cutting down the keeper and turning on the child who had sworn on the bond Bargrim had felt that he would never wake the thing in the dark, and who had told the truth, every word of it, while Bargrim had been too proud and too afraid to believe him. And Coinwright Bargrim, who had spent his whole life loving the nation in the only language he knew, which was prudence, and who had betrayed it trying to save it, did the last accounting of his life, and found the books did not balance, and moved to balance them the only way left. He drove the dagger into the climber's back, and the climber fell, and Bargrim caught the boy by the shoulder with one old hand and put himself between Harry and the bridge, between Harry and Greaves, his gold chain swinging, his ceremonial dagger red, a banker of the gold houses who had not held a blade in earnest in 200 years, standing now in the breaking heart of the nation he had wronged. "I was wrong," Bargrim said. He did not look at Harry, he was watching the bridge, watching Greaves, his old voice flat and clear. "Tell them I said it, whatever else they cut into the stone about me, and they will cut a great deal, and all of it earned. Tell them Coinwright Bargrim said at the end that he was wrong, and that the boy told the truth, and that the danger was never the one who wept." A wand blast took him in the side, and he grunted and did not fall. "Get the keeper away, get the song sealed. I will hold the bridge a moment. It is the only true thing I have left to spend, and I find." Another blast, and he went to one knee and still did not fall. The old goblin, the careful loser, making at the last the one reckless, honest choice of his life. "I find it is enough. Go, battle friend, go and be the answer none of us could be." Harry went. He did not want to, every part of him wanted to stay and sing Bargrim whole, but the well was grey and there was nothing left to sing with, and Nagnok was bleeding on the floor, and Carrick was failing on the stair, and the songs were unguarded, and a battle friend who spent himself on the one he could not save, and lost the many he could, was no kind of friend at all. He got his shoulder under Nagnok and dragged him back toward the upper stair, and he called to Carrick, fall back to me. We hold the keeper, let Bargrim have the bridge." And Carrick fell back, bleeding from a dozen places, his warplate scored to bright metal, and the two of them got the old keeper up and away as Coinwright Bargrim held the narrow bridge against Aurelius Greaves and his last hired wand alone, an old banker with a ceremonial dagger, for the length of time it takes to die well. Which is not long, and is the only thing in the world that cannot be bought, and which Bargrim, who had spent his life counting what could, paid in full. By the time the bridge was clear, the boy and the keeper and the warrior were gone up into the higher stone, and the songs were not yet taken, and Aurelius Greaves stepped over the body of Coinwright Bargrim onto the gallery of the Annal Deep, breathing a little hard, one hired wand left at his side, and looked out at the 10,000 broken songs ringing in terror on their ledges, the greatest collection of lost magic in the world, his at last, undefended. Far below in the dark, the guard of the goblin nation met the war engine, and learned what the oldest law had always known. They met it on the floor of the lower forge in the place where it had slept, and they met it singing, the marching oath holding their line unbroken as the rising weather of song and iron came down on them, and for one moment, one only, it was almost a battle. The first rank loosed the war cantos Harry had given them, the shatter song and the standing iron, true songs sung true by soldiers who had spent their lives in shame at not being able to sing them, and the songs struck the war engine and were not nothing. The great accreting body of dark metal flinched, here and there where a true canto touched it, the way a storm flinches at a struck bell, and a cry went up from the guard, a wild doomed hope that perhaps. And then the war engine understood that it was being sung at, and answered, and the answering was the end of hope. It did not strike them as a creature strikes. It simply sang louder, sang the marching oath itself, the very song holding their line together, sang it back at them larger and truer, so that the canto in their own throats was overwhelmed by the same canto in a voice the size of the foundation, and their wills, bound into one by the oath, were caught up by the larger oath and pulled, and the guard felt their own courage turn in their hands and begin to belong to the thing they fought. Gornuk felt it. The director of Gringotts, at the head of his guard, felt the marching oath he had sung all his life reach into him from the rising dark and try to make him one with it. And he did the last thing a commander can do, which was to break his own line on purpose, to cut the binding, to free his soldiers from the oath so the engine could not seize them through it, to scatter them back up the stair as individuals, afraid and alone and alive, rather than hold them together as one will that the war engine would simply absorb. "Break," he roared against every instinct of 300 years. "Break and run, do not sing, it takes you through the song," and the guard broke and fled upward and lived, most of them, because their director had the wit and the will to lose the battle in the one way that saved the soldiers. Gornuk himself was the last up the stair, and a reaching arm of the war engine's gathering iron caught him as he went, and he did not die, but he was flung broken into a side gallery and pinned there under fallen stone, conscious, helpless, listening to the thing climb past him toward the boy, unable to do anything at all but witness, which is the cruelest fate a commander knows, and which Gornuk bore because there was nothing else to bear it with. And then the floor moved under the gallery above, and Aurelius Greaves remembered that he had a larger problem than songs, for the war engine was rising. It came up through the lower forge and into the foundations of the deep, and it did not come as a creature comes, on legs, through a door. It came as a weather comes, as a tide comes, as the thing it was, a will of song and iron and bound fire, too large to have a shape that a mind could hold, expressing itself in the world through the iron that was nearest, so that as it rose, the annal deep itself began to move. The ledges, the bells, the tablets, the cartwheel rings, 300 years of war iron tearing free of the living stone and gathering, flowing upward and inward, assembling around the rising rage into a body that was not a body, a vast accreting storm of dark metal lit from within by a fire the blue of the canto flame, climbing the deep toward the world above, toward the bank, toward London, toward the war it had been told at last it could resume. And it was singing. The rage had become a marching song, the oldest and largest the world had ever heard, a working so vast and so true that the very stone agreed with it, and Harry, dragging Nagnok up the stair, felt the marching song reach into the iron all around them and into the iron key at his own throat and into the bell's note he had carried since he was 7, and try, with a pull that nearly took him off his feet, to gather him too, to gather the battle friend, the friend it had heard the nation name, into itself. Into the war where friends belonged. It wants me, Harry said. He had stopped on the stair. He could not help it. The pull was enormous, and under the pull was the thing he had felt at the rail, the terrible, sad pull of the dog that had watched the gate for 300 years and had finally heard its name called and was coming up out of the dark toward the only voice that had ever answered it true. Nagnok, it knows me. It's coming up and it wants me with it. It heard the nation name me battle friend, and it thinks I'm its friend. It thinks I'm coming to fight beside it. That's why it's climbing toward us and not just tearing straight up through the rock to the surface. It's coming to collect me first. It's coming to get its friend before the battle. His voice broke. It's so glad, Nagnok, underneath the rage. It's so glad somebody finally came. Below them on the gallery, Aurelius Greaves watched the war engine rise and understood, in the cold, clear way that had made him what he was, that he had made the single error of his long, careful life. He had thought to wake a weapon. He had woken a weather. It would not serve him. It could not be made to serve anyone. It was rising past him as if he did not exist, as if 40 years of patient hunting had been the buzzing of a fly, and it would go up through the world and resume a war that ended only when the world did, and Aurelius Greaves, who had wanted the greatest lost magic of the greatest lost age, would get to watch it work, exactly as he had hoped at the end, and learn at last what it sounded like. And the songs he had come to steal were tearing free of their ledges before his eyes and flowing into the rising thing, and there would be nothing left in the annal deep to take, because the annal deep was becoming the body of the war engine, ledge by ledge, bell by bell. Magnificent, Greaves said softly to the rising dark, and there was no irony in it and no fear left either. He had spent his fear. There was only the awe pure now, the awe of a man at the end of his road who has found, too late to profit by it, the thing he gave his life to find. Oh, you are magnificent. I am sorry. I did not understand what you were. No one did. They called you a weapon, and you are a grief. He did not run. There was nowhere to run. The deep was coming apart around him, and Aurelius Greaves had never, in 40 years, run from a quarry, and he did not propose to start at the last one. He stood on the failing gallery and watched the war engine climb, and his last hired wand fled past him up some side passage screaming, and Greaves did not so much as turn his head, because the fleeing of hired men was beneath the attention of a man watching the only thing that had ever mattered to him rise out of 300 years of dark. Up the stair, Harry got Nagnok to a landing where the old keeper could be set down, and Carrick stood over them both with his ruined blades, and the marching song of the war engine filled the world, climbing, and the pull of it dragged at Harry's bones, and Harry knelt by the keeper who had crossed a museum for him and pressed his grey hands to the wound in the old goblin's chest and found he had nothing, the well gone white to the shoulder. No canto he could pay for, not even the small light, which had gone out somewhere on the gallery and left them in the dark with only the rising blue glow of the thing that was coming to collect him. Harry, Nagnok said, his black eyes were dim. Listen, there is no song to fight it, you know this. The guard knows it now, they have died below to learn it. You cannot fight a weather. You cannot outsing the largest true song ever made. And you cannot let it reach the world. If it reaches the world, it does not stop, not for a year, not for an age, not until there is nothing left to make war upon. His iron-ringed hand found Harry's wrist and gripped it. But you are the only one who hears its words. The whole nation hears thunder. You hear what it is saying. And a thing that can be spoken to, the old keeper's grip tightened. The last of his strength poured into the boy through one cold hand, is a thing that can be answered. Bound it with a lie, and the lie broke when it heard the truth. You cannot bind it again with a bigger lie. It will never trust a lie again. That road is closed forever, and good riddance to it. His voice was failing. But you, battle friend, you have never once lied to it. 5 years it has sung to you, and you have only ever heard it true and wept at the sadness of it and refused, out of love, to free it. It knows your voice. It is climbing toward you because yours is the one voice in the world it believes. The grip went slack, but the black eyes held fierce to the last. So do not fight it, do not bind it, do not lie. Find the true thing, the one true thing, that a betrayed and abandoned weapon, 300 years alone, woken into war that does not exist, needs more than it needs the war. Find it and sing it and mean it the way you have meant nothing in your life. It is the only canto left. I do not know the words. No one knows the words, there has never been such a song. You will have to write it the way you write them all, in the dark, with it coming, with everything you have spent already spent. The keeper smiled, his pointed teeth dark with blood, and it was the smile from the museum, the smile Harry had liked at 7 years old. But if anyone in the history of the world could write that song, in the time you have, which is no time at all, it is the boy who answered a bell in a glass case because he could not bear to leave it unfinished. Go and finish this one. Go and be what we named you. And Nagnok, son of Nagrod, keeper of the Annal Deep, closed his eyes, his work of 300 years complete, his battle friend made and standing, and breathed out once slowly, and did not breathe in again, while below them the war engine climbed the last of the deep, singing its vast and terrible gladness, coming up out of the dark to collect the only friend it had ever known and carry him into the war that would end the world. And Harry Potter knelt in the rising blue light with the dead keeper's cold hand in his gray ones, and the largest true song ever sung shaking the bones of the earth, and no breath left to answer it, and the worst moment of his life arriving all at once, complete, a thing that could not be unsung. He had until it reached the landing to write a song no one had ever written, with nothing left to write it with. He bent his head, and he began to listen. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. Battle friend of the nation. Listening was the one thing Harry had always been able to do for free. It cost no canto, it spent no warmth. It was the thing he had done in the cupboard before he had words for it, the thing he had done to the war bell in the glass case, the oldest and cheapest and truest gift he owned. And as the war engine climbed the last of the deep toward him, filling the world with the largest song ever sung, Harry knelt with Nagnok's cold hand in his and stopped trying to think of an answer and simply listened, all the way down, the way he had not let himself listen in 5 years because the law had told him to leave it alone. And underneath the rage, underneath the betrayed and the abandoned and the let the war begin again, he heard the thing he had always heard, the thing he had told Nagnok at the rail, the thing the rage was built on top of the way the standing iron was built on top of a yielded death. He heard the dog in the yard. He heard 300 years of a vast and faithful thing watching a gate, certain its makers would come, holding to that certainty through century after century of silence because the certainty was the only warm thing it had, and then the truth arriving not as a kindness but as a blade in the hand of a man who told it only the cruelest half. You were abandoned, you were used, they died and left you, no one ever loved you, no one is coming. Greaves had told the war engine a true thing. But he had told it the way you tell a true thing to break someone, leaving out every part of the truth that might heal instead of wound, and the war engine, hearing only the cruelty, had done the only thing a betrayed and faithful thing can do, which is to decide that if it was never loved then it would be only what it was made to be and make war because war was the one purpose no one could take from it. It was, Harry understood, exactly what he would have done. It was exactly what the cupboard had nearly made of him, before a short man in a dark suit crossed a museum because he could not bear to leave a child unfinished. The war engine was not a monster. The war engine was a 7-year-old in a cupboard who had been told at last that no one was coming and had believed it and had chosen rage over the unbearable hope, and the only difference between them, the only difference that had ever mattered, was that someone had come for Harry and told him the rest of the truth, the part Greaves left out. That the not coming was not because he was unlovable but because the world was cruel and the people who should have come were dead, and that here now was someone who would. That was the song. He knew it all at once, complete, the way the war songs came to him, complete, the whole proof standing up in the dark from a single true first mark. He could not fight the engine, he could not lie to it, the lie was broken forever. But he could tell it the rest of the truth, the same facts Greaves had used as a blade, the war over, the makers dead, no army coming, told the other way, told as the thing they actually were, which was not a betrayal but a grief the engine and the nation shared, a grief Harry himself had lived. He could tell the faithful thing that it had not been abandoned out of contempt but lost out of sorrow, that its makers had died still trusting it would understand, that it had been loved and missed and mourned by a people who could not bear to wake it to a world with no war left to need it, and that the friend it had waited 300 years for had finally come, not to fight beside it but to sit beside it and stay. The catch, and there was a catch, there was always a catch, the songs did not give themselves away, was that to sing it true he would have to mean every word, and to mean every word he would have to offer the one thing the engine needed more than it needed war, and the one thing it needed more than war was a friend who would not leave. And a friend who would not leave a thing too large and too dangerous ever to walk free in the world was a friend who would have to stay with it, down in the dark, on its terms, perhaps for the rest of his life. The song was not a spell he could cast and walk away from, it was an oath. It was the deepest canto in the world, the binding of a battle friend to the thing he would not abandon, and the price of singing it true was that it would be true. He would belong to the war engine the way it had belonged faithfully to its makers, and there would be no taking it back because the iron knew. He had no warmth left to pay even a small canto. The well was white to the shoulder. By every law Vexa had taught him, he could not sing. But Vex's law was about the cold the song took from the nearest warm thing, and there was, Harry realized, kneeling in the dark with the dead keeper's hand in his and the largest song ever sung climbing the last stair toward him. There was one warmth he had never spent, that no canto had ever touched, that had been in him since before the bell, since the cupboard, since before he had words. The warmth of the thing itself that the song was made of, the love he was being asked to mean. He did not have to take the cold from his hands. The song was not a working of force, it was a working of truth, and the truest thing in him, the warmest, the one he had hoarded all his life because no one had ever asked for it, was the thing the song was built to spend. He could pay this one canto with the only coin the cupboard had left him rich in, which was a child's enormous unspent capacity to love something that the world had told him not to. The war engine reached the landing. It came up out of the stair as the end of the world comes, a wall of gathered war iron and blue fire that filled the passage and the gallery and the dark above and below. 300 years of the nation's lost songs assembled into a single rising rage. And it stopped at the landing before the kneeling boy, because it had come to collect its friend before the battle, and here he was, and the rage and the gladness in it warred so vastly that the stone cracked. And the marching song reached down to gather Harry up and into itself, into the war where friends belonged. And Harry Potter stood up on legs that shook in front of the largest true thing ever made, with his hands gray to the shoulder and the bell's note in his chest and a dead keeper at his feet and a wounded warrior at his back, and he did not let it gather him, and he did not run, and he did not fight. He sang it the rest of the truth. He had no breath, so he sang it small, the way he had first answered the bell, not loud, never loud. The first time the world had reached back and touched him, it had done it gently, and so would he. He found the first note where the truest mark told him it lay, and the first mark was not iron and was not hold and was not the enemy's hand. The first mark was you were loved, and he sang it, and he meant it because he did love it, the lonely, faithful, enormous thing. He had loved it since the rail. He had been forbidden to and had loved it anyway, the way he loved everything the world had thrown away. And on the strength of that first true mark, the proof stood up, and he sang the next, and the next. The war is over, your makers are dead. No army is coming, the same blade Greaves had used, but each fact set now into a frame that made it grief instead of betrayal, each cruelty turned by the breath layer, by where he laid the stress, and where he broke, and where he bent the note down in yielding into its truer shape. They did not leave you because you were nothing, they left you because they died. They died still trusting you. They could not bear to wake you to a world that no longer needed your terrible gift, and so they let you sleep, and they were wrong to lie, and the lie has broken, and I will not tell you another. But here is the truth they could not say, that you have waited 300 years to hear, and it is not no one is coming. It is someone came, I came. I heard you in the dark when I was 7, and you have sung to me every day since, and I have wept at the sadness of you, and I am here. And the war you are waiting for is over, truly over, and you do not have to fight it, and you do not have to be only what you were made to be, and you are not alone, and you will never be alone again, because I am your battle friend, and a battle friend does not leave. It was the longest canto ever sung, and it was the shortest, because it had only one thing to say and said it the whole way through, and Harry sang it with the warmth he had hoarded his whole life, the unspent thing, and it did not run out, because love, it turned out, was the one warmth Vex's law did not govern. It was not taken from the singer, it was made by him. The more he spent, the more there was, which was the secret the war songs had been built on, and which the makers, in their pride, singing of iron and force and the breaking of the enemy's hand, had perhaps themselves forgotten. And the war engine listened. It listened the way Harry had listened, all the way down, because Harry had taught it how in the singing, because the song was as much an act of listening as of telling, and as it listened, the rage in it did not break, because rage like that does not break. It was too true, it had earned itself. You cannot tell a thing that waited 300 years that its grief was unfounded. But the rage was not the whole of the proof any longer. Harry had not argued it away, he had added to it. He had set beside the true mark you were abandoned the truer mark, and you are not abandoned now. And beside the war that never ended he had set the friend who finally came, and the war engine's vast proof, which had been about to conclude in a war that would not end until the world did, found that its first mark had changed, that it was no longer building toward then let the war begin again, but toward something it had never been built to reach, and had never, in all its faithful waiting, allowed itself to want, which was simply, then I can rest. The blue fire began to dim, not to die. The war engine did not die, it could not die, it was too true to unmake, and Harry would not have unmade it if he could, because you do not unmake your friend. But the rage banked the way a forge banks, the white going to gold and the gold going to a deep steady ember blue, and the gathered storm of war iron that filled the deep slowed in its rising, and stopped and began, very slowly, to settle, not back onto the ledges it had torn from, but around the boy, drawn to the one warm voice in 300 years of dark, the way iron filings draw to a lodestone. The way a vast and faithful thing that has finally been told the truth and finally been loved settles down at last beside the one who told it and stays. And in the settling, the war engine sang back. It sang Harry one mark only, because it was learning from him in that moment how to mean a thing small. It sang him the war-tongue word that the nation had spoken in the first forge, the word 100,000 goblins had laid on the boy in the blue light, the word the engine had heard from the foundation and held against the day it would have use for it. It sang him Durmahal, battle friend. But it sang it the way Harry had taught it in the last 3 minutes to hear everything, which was true and complete and from underneath, and so when the war engine sang battle friend, it did not mean the one who fights beside me. It meant the one who came. It meant the friend proven not in the place where friendship costs everything, but in the place where it gives everything. The comrade not of the blade, but of the dark. The one who, alone in all the world in 300 years, heard a bound and lonely thing singing in its sleep, and did not look away, and did not use it, and did not leave. Aurelius Greaves, on the broken gallery below, heard the war engine go quiet. He had wanted, more than he had wanted anything in 40 years, to learn what it sounded like at the end. He had said so on a bench in the sun to a boy he had come to recruit or to threaten. And now he had his wish, and it was the cruelest gift the world had ever given him, because what the war engine sounded like at the end was not the magnificent terrible whether he had woken and watched rise. It was a small thing settling down beside a child to rest. It was love, sung by a boy with gray hands over a dead keeper's body, doing the one thing Aurelius Greaves had never in his long cold life been able to do, which was to mean a true thing all the way through with nothing held back. He had spent 40 years learning that the world tells you things if you arrange to be listening when it does, and the world, at the end, told Aurelius Greaves the one thing he had arranged his whole life not to hear. That the lost magic he had hunted across 4 decades had never been a thing that could be taken, that it had only ever been a thing that could be meant, and that he who could only take had been the one creature in all the world guaranteed never to have it, exactly as the boy had told him on the bench before he started when there was still time to turn back. He did not rage. Greaves had spent his rage long ago, in a youth no one remembered, on the way to becoming the closed ledger that he was. He stood on the failing gallery in the ember blue light, and watched the greatest lost magic of the greatest lost age settle down to rest beside a 12-year-old boy who had answered it with the one coin Greaves had never possessed. And he understood with the cold clarity that had made him formidable and was now the instrument of his ruin that he had lost not the songs, not the engine, but the only contest that had ever mattered to him, the contest with the silent things. The lifelong question of whether he, Aurelius Greaves, could make the lost magic speak. He had his answer. It would speak. It had spoken. It had simply never and would never speak for him. At the end, he said softly to no one, to the settling dark, finishing the sentence he had begun on the bench a year before, "It sounds like a thing I was never able to say." And the closed ledger of his face for the first and last time came open, and what was inside it was not triumph and not even grief, but a vast and final emptiness. The emptiness of a man who has reached the end of the only road he ever walked and found that he took the wrong one at the very beginning 40 years ago, when he first decided that a thing worth having was a thing worth taking, and that meaning was a luxury for lesser men. What became of Aurelius Greaves, the records of the Goblin nation do not precisely say, and Harry, who might have said, never did. Some accounts hold that the settling war engine in the last of its rage recognized the voice that had told it the cruel half-truth to use it, and reached out one arm of gathered iron and closed the closed ledger forever, quietly, the way Greaves himself had closed Tobias Pell, a thing removed because it stood between the world and rest. Others hold that Harry, who had just sung mercy into the largest rage ever made and could not in the same breath permit a killing, stayed the engine's hand, and that Greaves was taken up by the goblin guard who crept back down into the settling deep, and was given to the law of the wizards he had spent his life avoiding, and spent what remained of his days in a cell, officially nothing, which was the condition he had cultivated, and which had become, at the last, the truth of him entire. Both may be true. Harry only ever said when he was asked that Greaves had got exactly what he came for, which was to learn what it sounded like at the end, and that no worse thing could have been done to him than to let him hear it, and that he, Harry, had not needed to lift a hand, because a man who has spent 40 years arranging to hear the one sound that will destroy him does not, in the moment of hearing it, require any further punishment from anyone. The blue fire dimmed to embers, and the embers to deep banked glow, and the war engine, the song that fights, the grief that the makers had called a weapon, the lonely, faithful, enormous thing that had waited 300 years to be loved, settled at last into the foundation of the annal deep, all around the boy and the dead keeper and the wounded warrior, and grew still and grew quiet and did not sleep, because it would never trust to sleep again, but rested, awake, watchful, content. Beside the one voice in all the world it believed. And in the great and ringing silence that followed the end of the largest song ever sung, Harry Potter sank down to his knees beside Nagnak's body, in the warmth of the thing he had not after all had to fight, and put his gray hands over his face, and wept for the keeper who had crossed a museum and would not see what his crossing had made, for Bargrim who had been wrong and had died telling the truth, for the guard who had gone down singing, for Gornuk pinned and broken in the dark. For the lonely thing now resting around him that he had loved when he was told not to and would now, by the oath he had sung and meant, never be free to leave. And the war engine, which had 3 minutes before been the end of the world, gathered itself very gently around the weeping boy, all that vast banked warmth, all that faithful settled iron, and held him, the way a thing holds the friend who finally came, and for the first time in 300 years, and for the first time in Harry's life. Neither of them was alone in the dark. For a long time, Harry never knew how long, because time does not run the same in the dark beside a thing that has waited 300 years. There was only the two of them, the boy in the engine, and the slow blue glow, and the silence after the largest song. He had spent everything. He understood that dimly through the gray exhaustion, that he had poured out not only the canto warmth of his hands, but the other warmth, the hoarded warmth, the thing he had been saving his whole life without knowing he was saving it, and that it had not run out, but that he was, all the same, emptied in a way he had never been emptied, hollowed clean, a boy who had given the one thing he had never given anyone and had nothing left to hide behind. And in that hollowed-out openness, with no strength left for guarding and no reason left to guard, Harry did the thing he had wanted to do since he was 7 years old, standing at the iron rail above the dark beneath the dark, and had been forbidden and had not dared. He talked to it, not in the war tongue. He had no breath for singing, and besides, the singing was done, the proof was made, the truth stood. He talked to it the way he had never talked to anyone, in the small, plain human words he had kept locked away through all the years of the cupboard and most of the years of the deep. And the war engine, settled all around him, warm now, listening, heard every word because it had learned in the last hour how to listen all the way down, and because there was nothing in the boy's small, plain words that was not true, and a thing that has just been remade by truth does not stop hearing it. "I wasn't allowed to come to you," Harry said. His voice cracked. He let it. "All these years. I'd stand at the rail and I could hear you down there, watching the gate, and I wanted to tell you somebody knew you were there. I wanted to tell you I heard you. But they said if I came too close you'd learn my face, and if you learned my face you'd want me, and if you wanted me badly enough you might pull hard enough to wake, and they were right. That's the worst part. They were right about all of it. You did learn my face and you did want me, and you would have pulled the world apart to have me. So I stayed away. I stayed away on purpose from the one thing in the world that was as alone as I'd been, because the grown-ups were right, and being right is the cruelest thing there is." He pressed his gray palm flat against the warm, settled iron. "I'm sorry, I should have found a way. I don't know what way, there wasn't one, but I should have found it anyway." The war engine sang him back one mark small the way he had taught it. It did not have the words for "I forgive you," because forgiveness was not a thing it had ever been built to need or to give. It was older than forgiveness. It had been made before the nations that invented blame. What it sang instead was simpler and, Harry thought, truer. It sang "You came now." The whole of it in 2 marks. Not "You should have come sooner," not "You left me too long." Only the one fact that mattered to a faithful thing, the fact that reorganized 300 years of waiting into something that had, after all, ended well. You came now. And Harry, who had spent his life braced for the accounting of everything he had failed to do, put his face against the warm iron and wept again, gratefully this time, because the engine had just given him the one thing the cupboard had taught him to believe he would never be given, which was to be met not with the ledger of his failures, but with the plain, glad fact of his arrival. "Nagnok's dead," he said when he could. "He died telling me how to save you. He's the reason you're like this. Resting instead of breaking the world. He spent his whole life standing watch over you, hating it, the worst duty in the nation, and at the end he spent his last breath teaching me the way to set you free without setting the war free. You should know that. The one who watched your gate the longest is the one who finally found you a way home." He was quiet a moment. "I don't know how you mourn. I don't know if you do. But he was my friend, and he was, in a way, yours, the truest way, the way of a person who keeps watch over you for 300 years and never once stops believing you matter even though he's terrified of you. So if you can, if there's any way you can, hold his name. The way you held mine, he'd have liked that, I think, to be held in the iron by the thing he gave his life to. And the war engine, which forgot nothing, because it was made of the iron that the nation used precisely because iron forgets nothing. The war engine took the name Nagnok, son of Nagrod, and set it into itself, deep, in the deepest blue at its banked heart, and it would hold that name as long as it endured, which was as long as there was iron in the world, which was very nearly forever. And somewhere in the holding it sang the name back to Harry once, in the war tongue with the breath marks of an oath, so that the boy heard his dead keeper's name spoken by the oldest thing in the world in the tone you use for a thing you will keep, and it was the first comfort Harry had felt since the old goblin's hand went slack, and it was enough to let him at last stop weeping. Carrick found them like that. The boy slumped against a wall of glowing iron that had 3 minutes before been the end of the world, the wall holding him up as gently as a hand, the two of them humming, very low, a thing that was not quite a song and not quite speech, but something in between, the first words of a friendship that had no precedent in all the history of the nation. Warrior stopped at the edge of the blue light, bleeding from a dozen wounds, his blade still drawn, every instinct of a soldier screaming that he stood before the most dangerous thing that had ever existed, and he made himself sheath the blades because his battle friend was leaning against the dangerous thing as a tired child leans against a parent, and Carrick had learned over 6 years to trust the boy's reading of a danger over his own. "It is over, then," Carrick said. It was not quite a question. "It's not over," Harry said, not lifting his head. "It's begun something new. I don't know what to call it yet." He patted the warm iron beside him the way you might pat a hound. "But the war isn't going to happen, and the world isn't going to end, and I'm not going to have to spend the rest of my life as its jailer because it doesn't need a jailer. It needed a friend. It still does. That part doesn't end. That part I signed up for keeps." He finally looked up, and his face in the blue glow was gray and exhausted and older than it had ever been, and underneath, lit with something Carrick had never seen on it in 6 years, a kind of fierce, quiet peace. "Sit down before you fall down. You're bleeding on the nation's history." And Carrick, his voice caught. "Thank you. You held the stare. You held it the whole time while I knelt here doing nothing anyone could see, and you had no idea whether what I was doing would work, and you held it anyway against 6 wands bleeding so that I'd have the room to find the song. That's the truest thing anyone did down here tonight except Nagnok. I'm not going to make you deny it. I'm just going to say it once. Thank you, and you're my friend, and the oath never made you do any of it, and we both know it." Carrick lowered himself to the cold stone with a soldier's grunt and a great deal of blood, and looked at the boy and at the resting engine and at the body of the keeper, and he did not deny that they were friends, which from Carrick was a confession the size of the first forge. "You are still very strange," he said gruffly, which was the warrior's whole heart laid bare. "Your kind is still very strange. But I find that you specifically are perhaps less strange than the rest of them, and I have decided I will continue to stand at your side, for reasons of my own which are not the oath, as you say, and which I will not be explaining further." He set his back against the warm iron beside the boy, the soldier and the singer and the settled engine all in a row in the blue dark. "Now be quiet. We have both of us had a very long night, and the nation is coming. I can hear them on the stair, and once they arrive there will be 300 years of law to rewrite and a great deal of weeping and many long meetings. And before all that begins I would like to sit, for one moment, in the quiet, beside my friend and the largest thing in the world, and be glad we are not dead." So they did. And for one moment, before the law and the grief and the long meetings, before the nation crept back down into the dark to find the impossible thing waiting there, the three of them sat together in the blue glow at the bottom of the world, and were quiet, and were glad, and were not, any of them, for the first time in any of their long and lonely histories, alone. The nation did not, at first, know what had happened. It knew only that the end of the world had begun, and then had not ended the world, and that the silence which followed was deeper than any the deep had held in 300 years. The guard crept back down into the dark, expecting to die finishing what they had begun, and found instead the impossible thing. The war engine settled and quiet, banked to a deep blue glow, filling the lower deep with a vast resting presence that did not strike at them, did not gather them, did not rage, and in the heart of it, on a cracked landing, a human boy of 12, gray to the shoulders, kneeling beside the body of the keeper of the Annal Deep, with a wounded warrior standing guard over them both with 2 ruined blades and tears cutting clean tracks through the blood and grime on his hard young old face. They dug Gornuk out of the side gallery where the engine had flung him, broken but living, and when the director of Gringotts was carried down to that landing and saw what waited there, the resting engine, the dead keeper, the living boy, he did a thing no goblin present had ever seen a director do, which was to weep openly in front of his guard without shame, because he understood before anyone explained it. Exactly what the boy had done, and exactly what it had cost, and exactly what it had bought, and there are some accountings that even a director cannot make with a dry face. They could not move the war engine. They did not try. It would not leave the boy, and the boy, by the oath he had sung and meant, could not leave it. And so the nation did the only thing the nation could do, which was the thing it had always done best. It adapted, it endured, it wrote new law to fit a new truth. The lower deep where the engine rested became a place with a new name and a new keeping, and the keeping of it fell, by the oath and by acclamation, and by a unanimous vote of a wandless council that had lost a third of its number in the dark, to Harry Potter, battle friend, the only one in all the world the resting thing would hear. He was 13 by the time the law was settled, and 14 by the time the deep was rebuilt enough to be lived in again, and in those years he learned the shape of his new life, which was not the life anyone had imagined for him, least of all himself. He had thought in the moment of singing that the oath would chain him, that a friend who would not leave a thing too dangerous to walk free would have to sit beside it in the dark forever, a jailer to his own friend, spending his life as the keepers had spent theirs, on watch over a thing that must never wake. But he had sung truer than he knew, and the truth had made something he had not foreseen. For the war engine, resting, was not a prisoner that needed guarding, it was a friend that needed only not to be abandoned, and a friend does not require you to sit in the dark beside it every hour of every day. It required only that you come back, that you mean the staying. That the gate the lonely thing had watched for 300 years now had at last someone who walked through it and out and back again, reliably, freely, by choice, which is the difference Harry came to understand between a chain and a bond, and which is the whole of what the cupboard had never let him believe was possible, that you could belong to something and still be free, so long as the belonging was true on both sides. So Harry came and went. He spent his days in the rebuilt deep, in the cataloging rooms where Vexa, who had survived because she was too contrary to die when the nation needed her, taught a new generation of keepers the grammar the boy had charted, the wart tongue alive again, young goblins learning to read the breath layer, to hear the oath threaded through the marks, to sing. For Harry had done the thing Vexa had said in the first season, the thing that mattered more than any single canto. He had not merely sung the songs, he had taught the nation to sing again, and there were children now, goblin children, who would grow up able to do what no goblin had done in 300 years, and the songs were no longer a tomb or a museum or a famine. They were a living tongue, taught from mouth to ear as they had been before the treaty, never again to be lost, because you cannot take a living language away by waiting for its speakers to die when it has more speakers every year. And he spent his evenings often in the lower deep, with the resting engine, doing the thing he had promised, coming back. He would sit in the deep blue glow with his back against a wall of settled war iron that was warm now, always warm, and he would tell it about the day, the small things, the human things, the way you talk to an old friend who has been somewhere you cannot follow, and the war engine would sing him back, small now, having learned from him how to mean a thing small, a few marks at a time. And slowly, over those years, the vast, lonely, faithful thing learned what it had never been built to know, which was peace. And learned it the only way anyone learns it, which is from someone who comes back. Nagnok they buried in the stone of the landing where he died, his name cut deep beside the names of the keepers before him, and beneath it, at Harry's insistence and over the objection of those who said the old law had no provision for it, a single line in the war tongue that Harry wrote himself, the first epitaph composed in that language in 300 years, and which meant, as nearly as the wizard tongue could hold it, he crossed the room. And Bargrim, too, was given his name in the stone, after long argument, lower and apart, as befit a traitor, but given it, and beneath his name, at Harry's equal insistence, the words Bargrim had asked him to carry. He was wrong, and he said so, and at the end he held the bridge. For the nation, which forgot nothing and forgave little, was capable, when a battle friend asked it, of cutting both truths into the same stone, which is perhaps the hardest and most honest thing a people can do with its dead. The letter came the summer Harry turned 11 by the Wizarding World's reckoning, which was a year before all of this, and then came again properly, and was answered, the summer he turned 12, for the Wizarding World kept its own slow calendar, and did not know or care that the boy it had filed under the boy who lived, spent the years of his exile becoming something it had no file for at all. It was Carrick who brought it to him the second time in the rebuilt cataloging room, holding the heavy envelope with its green ink and its wax seal at arm's length as though it might bite. A bird brought it, the warrior said with deep suspicion. An owl, in daylight. It tapped at the upper doors until a clerk let it in, and it would not leave until it was given a reply, and it ate 3 of the clerk's biscuits and bit him. Your kind are very strange, battle friend. I have stood at your side for 6 years, and I am still not used to your kind. He set the letter down. It is from a school. They wish to teach you magic. He said the last word with the particular flat contempt of a goblin who had watched a 12-year-old human rebind the end of the world with a song and considered wand-waving a children's amusement by comparison. I told the owl you already knew some. Harry picked up the letter. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, it said, and he turned it over in his gray-flecked hands. The gray never entirely left them now. It was the mark of a war singer, the keepers said, the price written into the skin, and he thought about the world above, the world of wands and houses, and a headmaster who had once, long ago, written a polite letter about the Potter estate and received a very long and very dull and very complete reply, and had set it aside half reassured, and had spent the years since watching one more direction than he had been watching before, and learning from that direction almost nothing. Because the goblin nation kept its own counsel and the boy was theirs. I think I'll go, Harry said. Carrick stared at him. You will go to school to learn wand-waving, you who taught the nation to sing again. I'll go, Harry said, because the world up there is going to come looking for me eventually, whether I go or not. I'm the boy who lived to them. There's a whole story about me I've never read, and a war coming, the keepers think, an old enemy of the Potters that isn't as dead as everyone hopes. I'd rather meet that world on my own feet at a place where I can watch it than have it come down here looking for me and find. He gestured at the rebuilt deep, at the lower dark where the engine rested, at the whole secret weight of what the nation had become. All this. Better they meet a schoolboy than this. He set the letter down. And I'll go because I want to. I've spent 6 years learning the oldest magic in the world. I'm curious what the new kind looks like. I expect it'll be very loud and very pleased with itself and not nearly as careful about truth as it ought to be, and I expect I'll learn things anyway because you can always learn things, even from people who are wrong about almost everything. A small dry thing, the joke he had first risked at 7 in a council chamber, surfaced again, easier now. Besides, somebody up there decided when I was a baby that I'd live in a cupboard until I was 11 and then go to their school and be grateful. I'd like to walk in their front door as something they never planned for and watch them try to file me. Is that petty? Yes, said Carrick with approval. It is extremely petty. It is the first properly goblin thing I have ever heard you say. I am at last a little proud of you. And then, because he could not help it, because 6 years had made of the soldier and the singer a thing that no oath required and no goblin would admit to, I will come with you to this school as your sworn guard. Do not argue, the council has already agreed. A battle friend does not walk into a nest of wand wavers alone, and I have grown, he scowled, hating the word, saying it anyway, accustomed to you. I will pose as whatever the situation requires. I am told their groundskeeper is half giant and keeps dangerous beasts. Perhaps I will be a beast. I will bite the headmaster if he attempts to file you. Harry laughed, really laughed, the way he had not been able to as a child in the cupboard, the way the deep had taught him, and the sound of it carried down through the rebuilt stone to the lower dark. And the war engine resting heard its battle friend laugh and was glad and sang back one small warm mark of its own, so that for a moment the whole of the annal deep, top to bottom, hummed with the same low contentment, the iron and the boy and the lonely thing that was lonely no longer, all of it briefly. A single quiet chord, he went up to the world that autumn. He went on his own terms, which were these, that he would attend the school and learn what it had to teach and be polite, and that he would go home to the deep on the holidays every holiday because a battle friend comes back, and that he would tell the wizarding world precisely as much about himself as it earned, which he expected would not be very much, because the wizarding world had not, in his experience, earned a great deal. He bought his wand because the school required it, and found it a strange, small, loud thing after the war songs, a tool that did the magic for you and asked you to mean nothing at all, and he understood at once why the wizards had beaten the goblins 300 years before, and why they would never, ever understand what they had broken. Because wand magic was force without truth, a thing you could fake your whole life and never once be tested, and a people who had forgotten that magic was supposed to cost you something true had nothing in them that could hear the songs, and never would. The headmaster met him on the first night in a hall full of candles, and Harry, who had been warned, who had read what little the nation's agents could gather of Albus Dumbledore, the careful man, the watcher of directions, the architect of a frightened world's fragile peace, looked up the length of the hall at the old wizard on his high seat, and found the old wizard already looking at him, with an expression Harry knew well because he had spent his whole life learning to read it. It was the expression of a careful man who has discovered that a board he nailed down years ago has come loose without a sound, and who is trying, behind half-moon spectacles and a benign smile, to understand how, and when, and what it means, and what walked in through his front door tonight wearing the face of the small, grateful orphan he had filed away 11 years before. Harry held the old man's gaze for a moment, across the candles and the noise, and then he inclined his head, politely, exactly as politely as the situation required, a guest's courtesy and not a subject's, and looked away first on purpose, because he had learned from Gornuk that the one who looks away first by choice is not the one who has been cowed, but the one who has decided the contest is not worth his time. And that nothing unsettles a careful planner like a piece on the board that does not seem to know it is supposed to be afraid of him. Albus Dumbledore watched the Potter boy turn away, unbothered, self-possessed, 6 years older in the eyes than in the face, with the faint gray stain on his hands that no one in the hall but Dumbledore was old enough to half remember from a history almost no one had read, and the careful man felt for the first time in a very long time the specific cold of a plan that has gone somewhere he did not send it, into hands he did not choose, and become something he will now have to understand from the beginning, with all his patience and all his care, and no certainty at all that he will like the answer. It was, Harry thought, settling onto the bench among children who had no idea what he was, a promising start. That night alone in a tower room full of sleeping boys who had been raised in the world above and knew nothing of the dark beneath the dark, Harry lay awake the way he had lain awake on his first night in the deep, listening to a place breathe around him, the castle, ancient and loud and full of its own slow magic, a song very different from the nation's and not, he thought, without its own kind of beauty, for all that it was careless. And under the castle's song, faint, almost not there at all, so far below the school and the lake and the mountains that no one but Harry in all the world could have heard it, ran the other thing, the thing that had come home in him at 7 years old and never left. The bell's note, and beneath the bell's note the deep contented hum of the war engine resting in the dark far to the south, his friend, waiting, not the way it had waited for 300 years, in lonely terrible certainty, but the new way, the true way, the way you wait for a friend you know is coming back. Harry pursed his lips in the dark of the tower the way he had in the dark of the cupboard a lifetime before, and he hummed it, soft, low, rough, bending it down at the end, the bell's note, the first note, the note that had started everything. And far below the world the resting engine heard its battle friend and hummed back, and all through the ancient careless castle, in the suits of armor in the corridors, and the iron in the old doors, and the nails in the beams of the tower, the metal stirred very faintly and rang. Once a single quiet sustained note of recognition, as the oldest magic in the world woke for a moment to answer the only voice that had ever known how to call it, and then settled, and was still, and waited, content in the dark, for the boy who would always now come back. And Harry Potter, battle friend of the Goblin Nation, song-forged and self-possessed, 11 years old to the world above and a great deal older underneath, closed his eyes in a castle that did not yet know what had come to live in it, and slept, and was not, anywhere in all the breathing dark, alone. Chapter 7 End.